Daniel Carter stared at the envelope in his trembling hands. $2 million in certified checks, no return address, just 5 words scrawled on expensive cardstock. For your silence about everything. His blood ran cold as he looked toward the closed bedroom door, where his tenant, sweet, helpful Clara, who'd been living with them for 6 months, was probably still sleeping. The same Clara whose photograph he'd just found in a corporate directory. Clara Whitmore, daughter of the billionaire whose company had killed his wife. She'd been hiding in his home this entire time, and he'd welcomed her like family. Before we begin this story, I want to invite you to join me on this journey. Please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. Now, let's dive in. The rain hammered against the windows of the cramped 2-bedroom apartment like it was trying to break through, matching the rhythm of Daniel Carter's mounting anxiety as he sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out before him like accusations. Red ink, final notices, disconnection warnings. The fluorescent light overhead flickered, another thing he couldn't afford to fix, casting shadows that made the numbers seem even more damning. "Daddy, can I have pancakes?" Lily's small voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Daniel looked up to find his 7-year-old daughter standing in the doorway, clutching the stuffed rabbit her mother had given her 3 years ago, back when life made sense. Back before the illness. Before the medical bills that insurance mysteriously refused to cover. Before the funeral that had emptied what little savings they had left. "Sure, sweetheart," he said, forcing brightness into his voice as he quickly gathered the bills into a pile and shoved them into a drawer. "Pancakes coming right up." Lily climbed onto one of the mismatched kitchen chairs, setting her rabbit carefully on the table. Her dark hair was tangled from sleep, and she was wearing the pajamas with the unicorns that were getting too small. He'd need to buy new ones soon, another expense he couldn't afford. "With chocolate chips?" she asked hopefully. Daniel opened the cabinet and pulled out the box of pancake mix, checking the pantry for chocolate chips he knew weren't there. "How about we save the chocolate chips for the weekend? Make it extra special." "Okay." Lily's easy acceptance made his chest ache. She'd become so good at accepting disappointment, at understanding when things weren't possible anymore. No 7-year-old should be that understanding. As he mixed the batter, his mind drifted back to the conversation he'd had with his landlord 3 days ago. Mr. Kowalski had been sympathetic but firm. 2 months behind on rent meant eviction proceedings would start unless Daniel caught up within 30 days. The old man had actually apologized while delivering the news, his weathered face creased with genuine regret. "I got bills too, Danny," Mr. Kowalski had said. "My wife's medications, they don't pay for themselves. I held off as long as I could." Daniel hadn't argued. He'd simply nodded and asked for the 30 days, knowing he had no idea where the money would come from. His job at Henderson's Automotive paid barely above minimum wage, and the factory job he'd lost 6 months ago, the one with actual benefits and decent pay, was gone forever. Elite Solutions Corporation had bought the factory, stripped it for parts, and sold the land within 3 months. 200 people unemployed, Daniel included. The pancakes sizzled in the pan, and he flipped them carefully, watching Lily color in a dinosaur coloring book at the table. She hummed quietly to herself, the same melody her mother used to sing while cooking dinner. The sound was both beautiful and heartbreaking. "All done, princess." He slid 2 golden pancakes onto her plate, adding a small drizzle of syrup. "Thank you, Daddy." Lily picked up her fork and took a bite, her eyes lighting up. "They're really good." "Glad you like them, Lil." He sat down across from her with his own plate, though his appetite had vanished somewhere around bill number 7. After breakfast, Daniel walked Lily to the bus stop 3 blocks away, holding her hand as they navigated the cracked sidewalks of their deteriorating neighborhood. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of rain and exhaust fumes. Around them, the city was waking up, shop owners opening their grates, early commuters hurrying toward the subway, a homeless man arranging his cardboard sign on the corner. "Will you pick me up today?" Lily asked as the yellow bus rounded the corner. "I'll be here," Daniel promised, crouching down to zip her jacket all the way up. "Be good at school, okay? Pay attention in class." "I always do." She threw her arms around his neck in a quick hug before scrambling onto the bus. Daniel waved until the bus disappeared from view, then turned and walked slowly back to the apartment. The silence that greeted him when he opened the door was oppressive, filled with memories of when this place had been a home instead of just walls and obligations. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through job listings for the 100th time, applying to positions he was overqualified for and knowing he probably wouldn't hear back. The market was flooded with people just like him, factory workers with obsolete skills, competing for service jobs that paid half what they used to earn. Around noon, as Daniel sat filling out another online application, his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Daniel Carter? The voice was male, professional, slightly clipped. Speaking. This is Richard Chen from Elite Solutions Corporation. We received your application for a maintenance position at our downtown facility. Daniel's heart jumped. Elite Solutions, the same company that had bought and gutted his factory. He'd applied there out of desperation, not expecting anything. Yes, I applied last week. Unfortunately, that position has been filled. However, I wanted to call personally because I noticed your previous employment history. You worked at Riverside Manufacturing before we acquired it. That's right. I was there for 8 years. There was a pause. Mr. Carter, I want to be straightforward with you. Elite Solutions has moved past the need for traditional manufacturing positions. We're a property development and investment firm now. The future is in urban renewal and commercial real estate, not factory work. I'd encourage you to pursue opportunities in growth sectors, hospitality, service industries, things like that. The polite dismissal stung worse than an outright rejection. I appreciate the call, Daniel managed. Best of luck to you. The line went dead. Daniel set the phone down carefully, fighting the urge to throw it against the wall. They'd taken his job, destroyed his livelihood, and now they were offering career advice like they'd done him a favor. The rage that had been simmering since his wife's death flared hot in his chest. Sarah had gotten sick 2 months after Elite Solutions closed the factory. The doctors had been baffled by her symptoms: severe respiratory problems, strange rashes, persistent nausea. She'd deteriorated quickly, spending her last 6 weeks in a hospital bed while bills piled up and Daniel exhausted every avenue trying to save her. The final diagnosis had been listed as complications from unknown environmental exposure, which told them nothing and helped no one. Insurance had denied most of the claims, citing pre-existing conditions that Sarah had never had. Daniel had been too grief-stricken to fight them properly, too overwhelmed by single parenthood and job loss to navigate the bureaucratic maze. Now, sitting alone in his quiet apartment with bills in the drawer and no prospects on the horizon, Daniel made a decision. He posted an ad on 3 different roommate-finding websites. Room for rent, small bedroom and 2-bedroom apartment, quiet neighborhood, close to bus lines, $600 per month including utilities, month-to-month lease, available immediately. It felt like defeat, giving up the last piece of their family space, inviting a stranger into the home he'd shared with Sarah. But defeat was better than eviction. Lily needed stability, a place to sleep, food to eat. His pride wasn't worth her security. Within 2 hours, his phone was buzzing with responses. Daniel screened them carefully, ruling out anyone who seemed sketchy or demanding. A couple of college students, too young, probably too loud. A middle-aged man recently divorced, mentioned he liked to party on weekends. A woman who sent a 5-paragraph essay about her spiritual journey, too intense. Then there was Clara Whitmore. Her message was simple and direct. Hi, I'm a 22-year-old student looking for a quiet place to study and sleep. I work evenings and keep to myself. I can pay 6 months up front in cash if that helps. Can I see the room this week? 6 months up front in cash. Daniel read the message 3 times, looking for red flags. But there was something appealing about the straightforward tone, the offer of financial stability, the promise of quiet. And honestly, he was in no position to be picky. He replied, "Room is still available. Can you come by tomorrow at 3 p.m.? The response came within minutes. I'll be there. Thank you. That night, after Lily was in bed, Daniel stood in the doorway of what had been his office. He'd already moved his desk into his bedroom, cramming it awkwardly next to the dresser. The room was small, barely enough space for a twin bed, a small dresser, and maybe a desk if someone was creative. The walls were beige, the carpet worn but clean. A single window looked out onto the alley behind the building. It wasn't much to offer someone, but it was all he had. The next afternoon, Daniel had Lily stay with their neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind older woman who sometimes babysat when Daniel worked late. He cleaned the apartment obsessively, wiping down surfaces and vacuuming floors that didn't really need it, trying to make their shabby home presentable. At 2:58 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find a young woman standing in the hallway holding a single backpack. She was small, maybe 5'4", with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, no jewelry, minimal makeup. Her eyes were a striking green, intelligent and cautious as they met his. "Mr. Carter, I'm Clara Whitmore. Please, call me Daniel." He stepped aside. "Come in." Clara entered slowly, taking in the apartment with a careful gaze. Her movements were measured, almost too controlled for someone her age. Most college students Daniel had encountered were loud, careless, full of uncontained energy. This girl moved like someone much older, like someone carrying weight he couldn't see. "The room is this way." Daniel led her down the short hallway, pushing open the door. Clara stepped inside, setting her backpack down carefully. She walked to the window, looked out, then turned in a slow circle, assessing the space with the same careful attention she'd given the rest of the apartment. "It's perfect," she said finally. "It's small," Daniel admitted, "and the neighborhood isn't fancy, but it's safe, quiet. The bus stop is 3 blocks away, and there's a library 2 streets over if you need a place to study. It's exactly what I need." Clara turned to face him fully. "Your ad said $600 a month?" "That's right, utilities included. I can pay 6 months up front, cash, today if that works." She said it matter-of-factly, without any indication that carrying around $3,600 in cash was unusual. Daniel hesitated. That's very generous, but I should tell you up front. I have a daughter. She's 7. She's quiet and well-behaved, but kids make noise. If you need complete silence—" "I love kids," Clara interrupted gently. "Really, it's not a problem at all." There was something in her eyes when she said it, a flash of longing, maybe, or sadness. It was gone before Daniel could identify it properly. "When would you want to move in?" he asked. "Is today too soon?" Daniel blinked. "You don't want to think about it? See other places?" "I've seen enough places." Claire's voice was quiet but firm. "This feels right. If you'll have me, I'd like to move in today." Something about her desperation resonated with his own. Daniel recognized the look of someone who needed stability, who was running from something and hoping to find solid ground. He'd worn that same expression in the mirror for months. "Okay," he said. "Today works." Clara reached into her backpack and pulled out an envelope. Thick, substantial. She handed it to Daniel without ceremony. $3,600, 6 months. Daniel opened the envelope and found himself looking at $3,600 bills, crisp and sequential. His hands trembled slightly as he counted them. This was more cash than he'd held in years. More than enough to catch up on rent, pay the electric bill, buy Lily new clothes and actual groceries instead of bargain pasta and generic cereal. "I'll write you a receipt," he said, his voice rough. "That's not necessary." "It is for me." Daniel left her in the room and returned a moment later with a handwritten receipt, keyed on notebook paper. "Do you need help bringing stuff up? I can help with furniture or—" "This is all I have." Clara gestured to her single backpack. Daniel frowned. "That's it? No furniture? No boxes?" "I travel light." Her smile was small and didn't quite reach her eyes. "I prefer it that way." It should have struck him as strange. A college student with money to burn, but only one backpack of possessions. But Daniel was too relieved by the cash in his hand, too grateful for the reprieve from financial catastrophe, to question it too closely. "Well, welcome home," he said. "I'll let you get settled. Bathroom is down the hall, first door on the left. Kitchen's open any time. My daughter Lily will be back around 5. I should probably warn you. She's friendly. Really friendly. She'll probably want to show you every toy she owns." "I'd like that." Claire's smile became more genuine. "I'll try to stay out of your way, but I'm happy to help if you ever need anything. I'm actually pretty good with kids. I might take you up on that." Daniel moved toward the door, then paused. "Clara, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you okay? I mean, you seem like you're in a hurry to settle somewhere, and I just want to make sure you're not in some kind of trouble. If someone's bothering you, or if you need help. I'm fine, Clara said quickly. Too quickly. Just needed a fresh start. New city. New life. You know how it is. Daniel didn't entirely believe her, but he nodded anyway. Okay. Well, the offer stands. You need anything, you let me know. After he left, Daniel sat in his bedroom counting the money again, making sure it was real. Then he paid every overdue bill online, watched the negative balances turn positive, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. That evening, Lily burst through the door at 5:15, full of energy and stories about her day. Mrs. Rodriguez followed behind, carrying Lily's backpack. She was an angel as always, Mrs. Rodriguez said, ruffling Lily's hair. Thanks for watching her. Daniel walked Mrs. Rodriguez to the door, then turned to find Lily staring down the hallway with wide eyes. Clara had emerged from a room drawn by the commotion. She stood in the hallway looking uncertain, like she wasn't sure whether to introduce herself or retreat. Lily, Daniel said gently, this is Clara. She's going to be staying with us for a while. She's renting the spare room. Lily approached slowly, tilting her head up to look at Clara. You're really tall, she said seriously. Clara laughed, a real laugh that transformed her serious face. You're the perfect height, she replied, crouching down to Lily's level. And I like your rabbit. Does he have a name? Mr. Hopsworth, Lily said, holding up the stuffed animal. Mommy gave him to me. Something flickered across Clara's face. Understanding, sympathy. Your mommy had good taste. Mr. Hopsworth looks very distinguished. Do you want to see my room? Lily asked, already reaching for Clara's hand. Clara glanced at Daniel, who shrugged and smiled. Sure, Clara said. I'd love to. Daniel watched his daughter lead their new tenant down the hallway, chattering about her rock collection and the drawing she'd made at school. Clara listened intently, asking questions, acting genuinely interested in a 7-year-old's perspective on life. For the first time since Sarah's death, the apartment felt less empty. The following weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Clara was the ideal tenant, quiet, clean, respectful. She worked evening shifts at what she said was a coffee shop downtown, leaving around 3 and returning late, often after Lily was asleep. During the day, she studied, her door usually closed but never locked. She was also surprisingly helpful. When Daniel's car broke down and he couldn't afford the repair, Clara offered to drive Lily to school in the mornings. When Lily struggled with her homework, Clara sat with her at the kitchen table, explaining fractions with patient clarity. When Daniel worked a double shift, Clara made dinner and had it waiting when he got home. You don't have to do all this, Daniel told her one night, after coming home to find Clara helping Lily practice her spelling words. I know, Clara said simply. I want to. Lily had become utterly attached to their tenant. She followed Clara around when she was home, chattering endlessly, showing her drawings and rocks and every thought that crossed her mind. Clara never seemed annoyed, never rushed her away. She listened like Lily's words mattered, like her stories were important. One Saturday morning, Daniel woke to the sound of laughter in the kitchen. He found Clara and Lily making pancakes together, flour everywhere, both of them giggling as they tried to flip a particularly large pancake that immediately fell apart. We're making breakfast, Lily announced. Clara's teaching me the secret pancake recipe. The secret is just adding vanilla extract, Clara confided with a wink. But don't tell anyone. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, watching them work together, and felt his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. Gratitude, maybe. Or relief. Or something dangerously close to family. But underneath the comfortable domesticity, Daniel occasionally caught glimpses of something else. Clara would sometimes stand at the window, staring out at the street below with an expression of deep worry. She never received phone calls, never mentioned friends or family, never got mail. When Daniel asked casual questions about her life, where she was from, what she was studying, she gave vague, brief answers that revealed nothing. Midwest originally, she'd say. Haven't talked to my family in a while, studying general education. Haven't decided on a major yet. It was all technically information, but it added up to nothing concrete. One evening, about 2 months after Clara moved in, Daniel came home from work to find her sitting at the kitchen table with Lily, helping with math homework. But Clara's hands were shaking, and her face was pale. You okay? Daniel asked, setting down his keys. Fine, Clara said automatically. Just tired. But she wasn't fine. Daniel could see it in the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept darting to the window, the slight tremor in her voice. "Lily, why don't you go play in your room for a bit?" Daniel suggested gently. "But I'm not done with my homework." "I'll help you finish after dinner. Go on, sweetheart." Lily gathered her papers and left reluctantly. Once her door closed, Daniel sat down across from Clara. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. "Nothing, really. Clara." Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. "I've watched you for 2 months. You're scared of something. You jump every time someone walks by the window. You never go outside unless you have to. You're hiding from something, and I think we both know it." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back rapidly, her jaw clenched. "I can't talk about it. Is someone hurting you? Are you in danger? It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it. Maybe I can help." Clara laughed bitterly. "You can't. No one can. This is bigger than—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I shouldn't have come here. I'm putting you at risk just by being here." "At risk from what?" Before Clara could answer, there was a loud knock at the door, aggressive, demanding. Both of them froze. "Don't answer it," Clara whispered, her face draining of even more color. The knocking came again, harder this time. A man's voice called out, "Clara Whitmore, we know you're in there. Open the door." Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I have to go. I have to leave right now before—" The apartment door burst open, the flimsy lock giving way easily. 2 men in expensive suits stepped inside, their presence filling the small space with menace. "Miss Whitmore," the first one said, his voice smooth and cold, "your father has been very worried about you." Clara backed against the wall, her whole body trembling. "Get out! You have no right!" "We have every right." The second man pulled out his phone, showing her a screen. "Your father has legal guardianship concerns. Says you're not well, that you need to come home for treatment." "That's a lie!" Clara's voice broke. "I'm 22 years old. He has no guardianship rights." Daniel stepped between Clara and the men, his heart pounding. "I don't know who you are, but you just broke into my home. Get out before I call the police." The first man smiled, a predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Carter, is it?" Daniel Carter, formerly employed at Riverside Manufacturing, 1 daughter, significant debts, 3 months behind on electric bills despite recent payment. "You really want to involve the police in this?" The casual recitation of his private information sent ice through Daniel's veins. These weren't just corporate security, they were something worse. "Clara," the second man said, his tone almost kind. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Come with us now, and your friend here doesn't get hurt. Refuse, and we'll have to involve child services. Wouldn't want little Lily to end up in foster care because her father was deemed unfit to parent." "Don't you dare threaten my daughter!" Daniel's voice shook with rage. "Then convince your tenant to be reasonable." The first man straightened his tie casually. "We're leaving here with Miss Whitmore one way or another. The only question is how much damage we do on the way out." Clara's face crumpled. She looked at Daniel with devastated eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for bringing this to your door." She moved toward the men, her shoulders slumped in defeat. But as she passed Daniel, she pressed something small and hard into his hand, a USB drive. "Everything you need to know," she breathed, too quiet for the men to hear. "Be careful." The men escorted Clara out of the apartment, one on each side of her like prison guards. She didn't look back. Daniel stood frozen in his living room, the USB drive burning in his palm, his mind reeling. Lily's door opened. "Daddy, where did Clara go? Who were those men?" Daniel pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her tight. "I don't know, baby, but I'm going to find out." That night, after Lily finally fell asleep, Daniel sat at his computer and inserted the USB drive. What he found made his blood run cold. Thousands of files, corporate emails, financial records, internal memos from Elite Solutions Corporation, medical reports, photographs of contaminated water supplies, lists of properties purchased after mysterious environmental incidents, settlement agreements with families whose loved ones had died. And at the center of it all, Victor Whitmore, billionaire CEO of Elite Solutions Corporation. Clara's father, the same company that had destroyed Daniel's factory. The same company he'd cursed 100 times for ruining his life. Daniel clicked through the files with shaking hands, recognizing names and dates. The factory closure hadn't been about market conditions or efficiency. It had been about the land. Elite Solutions had contaminated the groundwater deliberately, driving down property values, then bought the land for pennies on the dollar. The contamination had spread to the surrounding neighborhood, to the apartment complex where Daniel and Sarah had lived during his years at the factory, to the water they'd drunk, showered in, cooked with for 8 years. His hands clenched into fists as he opened a medical file titled Riverside Contamination, Known Health Effects. Severe respiratory problems, strange rashes, persistent nausea. The exact symptoms Sarah had suffered before she died. Daniel's vision blurred with tears of rage. They'd killed her. Elite Solutions Corporation had deliberately poisoned the water supply to make money, and they'd killed his wife in the process. And Clara, the billionaire's daughter, had stolen the proof. Now she was gone, dragged back to the people who'd committed these crimes. And Daniel was sitting in his apartment holding evidence that could bring down an empire but destroy his life in the process. He thought about Lily, sleeping peacefully in the next room. He thought about Sarah, dying in that hospital bed while doctors scrambled to understand symptoms that should never have existed. He thought about Clara, who'd lived with them for 2 months, who'd helped his daughter with homework and made pancakes on Saturday mornings, who'd given up everything to expose the truth about her own father. Then Daniel pulled out his phone and started making calls. The next morning, a heavy envelope arrived by courier. Daniel signed for it, recognizing the Elite Solutions Corporation logo on the return address. Inside was a certified check for $2 million and a single card with 5 words printed in elegant script. For your silence about everything. Daniel stared at the check for a long time, thinking about what $2 million could mean. No more debts, college fund for Lily, a real home in a safe neighborhood, security for the rest of their lives. All he had to do was destroy the USB drive and pretend he'd never seen what was on it. All he had to do was let them win. Daniel picked up his phone and finished the call he'd started the night before. Hello? The voice on the other end was cautious, professional. Ms. Chen? This is Daniel Carter. We spoke last night about the Elite Solutions files. I'm ready to talk, and I'm bringing everything. There was a pause, then, Mr. Carter, you understand what you're doing. Once this goes public, there's no taking it back. They'll come after you with everything they have. Daniel looked at the photograph on his wall. Sarah, healthy and smiling, holding newborn Lily in her arms. A moment frozen in time, before Elite Solutions Corporation had stolen their future. Let them come, Daniel said quietly. Some things are worth fighting for. He ripped the check in half and dropped the pieces in the trash. The war had just begun. The journalist's name was Angela Chen, and she worked for the Metropolitan Investigative Journal, one of the few remaining newspapers that still did actual investigative reporting. Daniel met her 3 days after tearing up the check in a coffee shop 12 blocks from his apartment, at a table in the back corner where they could talk without being overheard. Angela was in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of tired expression that came from years of chasing stories nobody wanted told. She ordered black coffee and got straight to business. Before we go any further, Mr. Carter, I need you to understand what you're getting into, she said, pulling out a small recording device and setting it on the table between them. Elite Solutions Corporation has an army of lawyers. They've buried stories before, intimidated sources, bankrupted smaller publications with nuisance lawsuits. If we publish this, they will come after you personally. Your finances, your custody of your daughter, your employment history, everything will be scrutinized and weaponized. Daniel's jaw tightened. They already threatened my daughter to get to Clara. I'm not backing down. Clara Whitmore. Angela leaned forward. The CEO's daughter. How did you come into possession of her files? She was renting a room in my apartment. I didn't know who she was until her father's security team kicked down my door and dragged her out. Daniel slid the USB drive across the table. She gave me this before they took her. Said it was everything I needed to know. Angela picked up the drive carefully, like it might explode. Have you looked at what's on here? All of it. Took me 2 days. Daniel's voice was rough. My wife died from the contamination at Riverside. She had every symptom listed in those medical files. They killed her to make money off real estate deals, and then they tried to pay me to stay quiet about it. Angela's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry for your loss. Truly. She pocketed the USB drive. I'll need time to verify these documents, cross-reference the data, build a case that's ironclad. Elite Solutions will claim everything is fabricated or taken out of context. We need to be bulletproof. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. I'll need to bring in experts, environmental scientists, medical professionals, forensic accountants, and I'll need you to go on record with your testimony about your wife's illness and the timeline of events. Daniel nodded. Whatever you need. There's one more thing. Angela's eyes were serious. Clara Whitmore. Do you know where they took her? No. They just said her father wanted her home for treatment. Made it sound like she was mentally unstable. That's their standard playbook. Discredit the whistleblower, claim mental illness, lock them away somewhere they can't talk to anyone. Angela drummed her fingers on the table. If we're going to do this right, we need her testimony too. She's the one who gathered this evidence. She can speak to the internal workings of the company, confirm the authenticity of these documents. Without her, this story is good, but not devastating. With her, it's nuclear. Then we need to find her, Daniel said. Easier said than done. Victor Whitmore has resources we can't match. Private security, safe houses, legal teams that can tie us up for years. Angela paused. But I know some people who might be able to help. Let me make some calls. They parted ways with a plan to meet again in 1 week. Daniel walked home slowly, hyper-aware of every person around him, every car that seemed to slow down as it passed. He'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. When he got home, Mrs. Rodriguez was watching Lily in the living room. His daughter was drawing at the coffee table, her tongue poking out in concentration. Everything okay? Mrs. Rodriguez asked quietly, reading the tension in Daniel's face. Getting there, he lied. Thanks for staying with her. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Lily looked up from her drawing. Daddy, is Clara coming back? The question pierced his heart. I don't know, sweetheart. I miss her. Lily's lower lip trembled. She was nice. She helped me with my spelling, and she didn't get mad when I spilled juice on her book. Daniel sat down next to his daughter and pulled her into his lap. I miss her too, but sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems that are hard to fix. Are you going to fix it? He thought about the USB drive in Angela's possession, about the evidence that could bring down a corporation, about the risk he was taking with their safety. I'm going to try. The next week crawled by with agonizing slowness. Daniel went to work, picked Lily up from school, made dinner, helped with homework, all the normal routines of life, while his mind spun with anxiety. He jumped at every unexpected sound, scrutinized every unfamiliar car on their street, checked the locks on the doors 3 times before bed. On the 4th day, a black sedan parked across from their building and stayed there for 6 hours. Daniel watched it from the window, his heart pounding, until it finally drove away. He had no proof it was connected to Elite Solutions, but he knew. They were watching. On the 7th day, he met Angela again. This time she chose a library in a different neighborhood, and they sat at a study table surrounded by college students cramming for exams. I verified the documents, Angela said quietly, sliding a folder across to him. Every single file on that USB drive is authentic. Email metadata checks out, financial records match corporate filings, the environmental data correlates with EPA, reports that were mysteriously buried. This is the real deal, Daniel. This is a Pulitzer-level scandal. Daniel's hand shook as he opened the folder. Inside were printed excerpts from the files, annotated with Angela's notes and cross-references. Look at this. Angela pointed to an email chain dated 3 years ago. This is Victor Whitmore himself, discussing the Riverside contamination with his VP of Acquisitions. Quote, the environmental impact will accelerate our timeline. Property values should drop 30 to 40% within 6 months, giving us optimal acquisition conditions. They knew exactly what they were doing. Daniel read the email, bile rising in his throat. Sarah had started showing symptoms about 7 months after this email was sent. 7 months after Victor Whitmore had coldly calculated the environmental impact that would kill her. There's more. Angela flipped to another section. I found settlement agreements with 12 different families across 3 cities. All signed NDAs. All received five-figure payouts. All lost someone to mysterious illnesses with symptoms matching toxic exposure. Elite Solutions buried them with money and legal threats. 12 families? Daniel's voice was hollow. That we know of. There could be more. Angela leaned back in her chair. This company has been doing this for at least 5 years. Contaminate, devalue, acquire, develop. They've made billions off this strategy. And Clara found all of this? She had inside access. Her father trusted her with low-level administrative work, probably thought she was just filing papers and scheduling meetings, but she was smart enough to recognize what she was seeing, started copying files, building a case. Angela's expression was grim. When Victor found out, he tried to have her committed, said she was delusional, mentally unstable, a danger to herself. That's when she ran. Daniel closed the folder carefully. Did you find out where she is? Maybe. Angela pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph of an elegant building with manicured lawns. Whitmore Estate, about 2 hours north of the city. It's technically a private residence, but it's built like a fortress. Cameras everywhere, security guards, the works. My source says Clara is being held there under the guise of receiving treatment for her alleged mental health issues. She's a prisoner in her own father's house. Essentially, yes. And without her testimony, our story is weaker. We can publish what we have, and believe me, it's damning. But Victor's lawyers will attack the authenticity of the documents. They'll claim they're fabricated, taken out of context, stolen and altered. Claire's voice is crucial. She can confirm everything, provide context, explain the internal processes. She's the smoking gun. Daniel stared at the photograph of the estate. So we need to get her out. I can't ask you to do that, Angela said carefully. What you've already given me is enough to start building the story. Breaking into a private residence to extract someone who's legally an adult but being held against her will? That's kidnapping, trespassing, a dozen other charges. You have a daughter to think about. My daughter asks about Clara every single day, Daniel said quietly. She wants to know when she's coming home. And I keep telling her I don't know because I don't want to lie to her. But the truth is, Clara can't come home unless someone helps her. Angela studied him carefully. You really care about this girl. She's part of our family. The words came out before Daniel could stop them, but he realized they were true. In 2 short months, Clara had become essential to their lives. Not just a tenant, but someone Lily loved, someone who made their small apartment feel like a home again. I can't leave her there. Even if it means risking everything, Daniel thought about Sarah, about justice delayed and denied, about the 12 families who'd been silenced with money, about all the people who might die in the future if Elite Solutions wasn't stopped. Especially because of that. Angela was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed and pulled out a business card, writing a phone number on the back. This is Marcus Webb. He's a private investigator who's helped me with stories before. Used to be a cop, got disillusioned. Now he helps people who can't get help through official channels. Tell him I sent you. He might be willing to do a security assessment of the Whitmore estate. A security assessment? Just looking for weaknesses in their setup, gaps in camera coverage, blind spots, shift changes, information only. Angela held his gaze. What you do with that information is your own choice. I can't be involved in anything illegal, Daniel. My hands have to stay clean or the story gets compromised. Daniel took the card. I understand. One more thing. Angela's voice dropped even lower. I'm running this story in 2 weeks regardless. With or without Clara's testimony, the evidence is too strong to sit on. So if you're going to do something, do it fast. That night, Daniel called Marcus Webb from a payphone 3 blocks from his apartment. He wasn't sure if his cell phone was being monitored, but he wasn't taking chances. Marcus had a deep, gravelly voice that sounded like he'd smoked a pack a day for 20 years. Angela says you need help with a security situation. I need to get someone out of the Whitmore estate, a young woman being held there against her will. Held how? Locked in a room? Or just can't leave? I don't know the details. Her father's security team grabbed her from my apartment and took her there. She's an adult, but they're claiming she needs mental health treatment. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Victor Whitmore's kid? The one who's supposedly having a breakdown? It's not a breakdown. She was exposing corporate crimes and her father is trying to silence her. And you want me to help you break her out. I want you to tell me if it's possible. Another pause. It'll cost you. Security assessments don't come cheap. Daniel thought about the $2 million check he'd torn in half. I don't have much money. How much is not much? Maybe $300. Marcus laughed, a rough sound without much humor. 300 won't even cover gas for the surveillance, but Angela vouched for you and I owe her a favor. I'll do a preliminary assessment for 500. If you can scrape together the difference, we'll talk about next steps. Daniel did the math in his head. He'd need to skip the electric bill payment, use money earmarked for groceries, maybe sell his laptop. I can get 500. Meet me tomorrow at noon. I'll text you the address. The line went dead. Daniel stood in the phone booth for a long moment, watching traffic pass by, wondering if he was making a terrible mistake. Then he thought about Clara pressing the USB drive into his palm, whispering, "Be careful," as armed men dragged her away, and he knew he didn't have a choice. The next day, Mrs. Rodriguez watched Lily again. Daniel told her he had a job interview, which was technically true if job meant rescue mission and interview meant meeting with a private investigator. Marcus Webb turned out to be a stocky man in his 50s with graying hair and a face that had seen too much. They met in a diner on the outskirts of the city, and Marcus ordered enough food for 3 people. "Tell me everything," he said around a mouthful of eggs. "Start with how you know Clara Whitmore and why you care." Daniel laid out the whole story. The room rental, Clara's integration into their lives, the security team breaking down his door, the USB drive full of evidence, his wife's death from contamination caused by Elite Solutions Corporation. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When Daniel finished, he sat back and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "So this isn't just about rescuing some girl you feel sorry for," Marcus said. "This is personal. They killed your wife." "Yes." "And you're willing to risk custody of your daughter to get revenge?" The question hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "This isn't revenge. This is justice. Justice is what happens in courtrooms with judges and juries. What you're talking about is vigilante action. There's a difference." Marcus pulled out a tablet and brought up aerial photographs of the Whitmore estate. "But I'm not here to lecture you on morality. You want information? I'll give you information. What you do with it is your business." He swiped through several images, pointing out key features. The estate is 40 acres, mostly wooded. Main house is here, security station here, guest house here. They've got a perimeter fence with motion sensors, cameras covering all entry points, guards doing regular patrols. Professional setup, not mall cop level. "So it's impossible." "I didn't say that. I said it's professional. There's always weaknesses if you know where to look." Marcus zoomed in on the eastern side of the property. This section has less coverage because of the tree line. Cameras can't see through dense foliage. And the motion sensors are calibrated to ignore small animals, which means if you stay low and move slowly, you might avoid triggering them. Daniel leaned forward, studying the images. "How do I know which room Clara's in?" "You don't. That's the tricky part. You'd need to get inside, locate her, and get out without being caught. Best case scenario, you have maybe 20 minutes before someone notices you're there. And worst case?" Marcus met his eyes. "You get arrested for breaking and entering, lose custody of your daughter, and Clara stays exactly where she is. Plus, you go to prison." Daniel swallowed hard. "What would you do? If it were you?" "I'd think very carefully about whether one person is worth destroying your whole life." Marcus closed the tablet. "But I'm not you, and I wasn't married to someone who died because a corporation poisoned the water supply. So maybe my risk tolerance is different. Will you help me? I can give you maps, patrol schedules, equipment recommendations. I can tell you the best time to attempt entry and the safest route to take. But I can't go with you. I've got too much to lose." Marcus pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. $500 buys you everything I know about that property. The rest is up to you." Daniel counted out $500 in 20s and 50s. Money he'd scraped together from his emergency fund, from selling his old laptop, from returning bottles for deposit. His hands shook as he handed it over. Marcus took the money and handed him the folder. "One more piece of advice, free of charge. If you do this, do it soon. Security gets tighter the longer Clara's there. And don't tell anyone your plan, not your neighbors, not your friends, nobody. Loose lips sink ships. Angela already knows. Angela knows you want to help Clara. She doesn't need to know the details. Keep it that way. Marcus stood up, dropping cash on the table for the meal. Good luck, Daniel. You're going to need it. After Marcus left, Daniel sat alone in the booth and opened the folder. Inside were detailed maps, security camera locations marked in red, patrol routes highlighted in yellow, notes about guard shift changes and blind spots in coverage. It was thorough, professional, and absolutely terrifying. He was really going to do this. That evening, Daniel sat Lily down after dinner and had a conversation he'd been dreading. "Sweetheart, I need to go away for one night," he said carefully. "Mrs. Rodriguez is going to stay with you, and I'll be back tomorrow morning." Lily's face crumpled. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to try to help Clara come home." "Really?" Hope blazed in Lily's eyes. "You found her?" "I think so, but it's going to be difficult, and I need you to be very brave. Can you do that for me?" "Will you bring her back?" Daniel thought about all the things that could go wrong, the cameras, the guards, the legal consequences, the very real possibility that he'd end up in jail instead of bringing Clara home. "I'm going to try my best." Lily threw her arms around his neck and squeezed tight. "I love you, Daddy. Please be careful." "I love you too, Lil, more than anything in the world." He held her for a long time, memorizing the weight of her in his arms, the smell of her strawberry shampoo, the sound of her breathing. If everything went wrong tomorrow night, this might be his last moment of peace with his daughter. The thought terrified him, but not as much as the thought of doing nothing. Daniel spent the next day preparing. He bought dark clothing from a thrift store, a small flashlight, a backpack. He studied Marcus's maps until he had them memorized, tracing routes with his finger, identifying backup exits, planning for contingencies. He called Angela one last time. "I'm going to get Clara tonight," he said without preamble. Angela was silent for a long moment. "Daniel, I can't. I'm not asking you to be involved. I'm just telling you that if everything goes right, Clara Whitmore will be available for an interview tomorrow morning. And if everything goes wrong, you should publish the story anyway. Don't wait for me." "Daniel, promise me. No matter what happens to me, you publish that story. You make sure everyone knows what Elite Solutions did." "I promise," Angela said quietly. "But Daniel, come back safe. Your daughter needs you." "I know." His voice broke slightly. "That's why I have to do this. I need her to grow up in a world where people fight for what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous." After dark, Daniel kissed Lily goodnight and waited until she was asleep. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at 9, settling into the living room with her knitting and a cup of tea. "Thank you for this," Daniel said, pulling on his jacket. "You're a good man, Daniel Carter," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her eyes knowing. "Whatever you're doing, I trust it's the right thing." He didn't deserve her faith, but he was grateful for it anyway. The drive to the Whitmore estate took 2 hours through increasingly rural roads. Daniel parked his car half a mile away, hidden in a copse of trees, and approached on foot. His heart hammered against his ribs so hard he thought it might break through. The fence loomed ahead, 10 feet tall and imposing. According to Marcus's notes, the eastern section had a weak point where tree roots had partially undermined the foundation. Daniel found the spot and carefully worked his way under, ignoring the pain as metal scraped against his back. Inside the perimeter, he moved slowly through the trees, staying low, avoiding the sight lines Marcus had marked on the maps. The main house glowed with lights, elegant and massive, a monument to wealth built on suffering. Daniel counted his breaths, forcing himself to stay calm. He made it to the side of the house and pressed himself against the wall, listening. Footsteps somewhere to his left, a guard making rounds. He waited until they passed, then moved to a window on the ground floor. Locked, as expected. He tried 3 more windows before finding one that had been left slightly open, a bathroom on the first floor. Daniel squeezed through, dropped silently to the tile floor, and froze, listening for any sign he'd been detected. Nothing. The house was quiet, decorated with expensive artwork and furniture that probably cost more than Daniel would earn in a lifetime. He moved through the hallway on silent feet, checking rooms systematically. Library, study, sitting room, all empty. A staircase led to the second floor. Daniel climbed it carefully, testing each step before putting his full weight down, praying nothing would creak. Upstairs were bedrooms. He checked the first two, guest rooms, unused. The third door was locked from the outside. Daniel's pulse spiked. He pulled out the lockpick set Marcus had included in the folder, a simple tension wrench and pick that Marcus had assured him would work on basic interior locks. His hands shook as he worked, but after what felt like an eternity, he heard the click of the lock opening. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside, sitting on a bed in pajamas with a book in her lap, was Clara. She looked up, and her eyes went wide with shock. "Daniel?" she whispered. "What are you? How did you—" "We don't have much time," Daniel said quietly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "Can you walk? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. They're just keeping me locked up." Clara stood, setting the book aside. Her hands were shaking. "You shouldn't be here. If they catch you—" "They won't. We're getting you out of here." Daniel grabbed her hand. "Do you have shoes? A jacket?" "Daniel, you don't understand. My father has people everywhere. Even if we get out of this house, he'll find me. He'll hurt you and Lily to get to me." "Then we make sure he can't." Daniel met her eyes. "Angela Chen is ready to publish the story. All of it. Every document you collected. Every crime your father committed. But she needs your testimony to make it stick. We're going to bring him down, Clara. Together." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "You kept the files? I thought they would have forced you to destroy them." "They tried to buy my silence. Offered me $2 million. Daniel's voice was hard. "I tore up the check." Clara let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You're insane. You know that?" "Probably. Now let's go before we both end up in prison." They made it down the stairs and were halfway to the bathroom window when lights flooded the hallway. "Stop right there!" A security guard rounded the corner, hand moving to his weapon. Daniel didn't think. He grabbed Clara's hand and ran, sprinting toward the nearest exit, a set of French doors leading to a patio. He slammed into them shoulder first, the lock giving way with a crack of splintering wood. Alarms shrieked to life as they burst outside. They ran across the manicured lawn toward the tree line, security lights blazing to life around them. Daniel heard shouting behind them, footsteps pounding, but he didn't look back. He just ran, pulling Clara with him, adrenaline flooding his system. They crashed into the woods, branches whipping at their faces. Daniel oriented himself by memory, heading for the weak point in the fence. Behind them, flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "There!" A guard's voice, too close. Daniel and Clara reached the fence and dropped to the ground, scrambling under the gap. Metal tore at Daniel's jacket and scraped Clara's arm, but they made it through. On the other side, they ran toward where Daniel had parked the car, lungs burning. The woods seemed endless, every shadow a potential threat. But finally, blessedly, they burst out onto the road and Daniel saw his car waiting. He fumbled with his keys, got the door open, shoved Clara inside. The engine roared to life and he peeled out, tires spitting gravel. In the rearview mirror, he saw flashlights emerging from the woods. But they were too late. They'd made it. Clara was breathing hard, her hand pressed to her bleeding arm where the fence had caught her. "I can't believe you just did that. I can't believe you came for me." "Your family," Daniel said simply. "We don't leave family behind." Clara started crying then, real sobs that shook her whole body. Daniel reached over and took her hand, squeezing tight. "It's going to be okay," he said, though he had no idea if that was true. "We're going to make this right." They drove through the night, leaving the Whitmore estate and its security forces behind. By the time they reached the city, dawn was breaking over the skyline. Daniel's phone rang. "Angela." "Tell me you didn't do something stupid," she said when he answered. Define stupid. "Daniel, Clara's with me. She's safe, and she's ready to talk." There was a long pause. "You actually did it. You actually broke her out." "Yeah." Daniel felt exhaustion crashing over him now that the adrenaline was fading. "So now what?" "Now we finish this. Meet me at my office in 2 hours. And Daniel, bring everything. Every file, every document, every piece of evidence. We're going nuclear with this story." Daniel hung up and looked at Clara, who had stopped crying and was staring out the window at the city waking up around them. "You ready for this?" he asked. Clara turned to him, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled. A real smile, fierce and determined. "Let's burn it all down," she said. Angela Chen's office was tucked into a converted warehouse in the industrial district, shared with 3 other small media outlets that couldn't afford downtown rent. The building smelled like coffee and printer ink, and the walls were covered with framed front pages from stories that had actually mattered, back when newspapers still had the resources to matter. Daniel and Clara arrived just after 8 in the morning, both of them exhausted and running on nothing but adrenaline. Angela met them at the door, her eyes sharp despite the early hour. "Inside, quickly!" She ushered them through the main office space, past desks cluttered with papers and computer monitors, into a conference room at the back. "We don't have much time. Victor Whitmore will have already filed a police report about the break-in. They'll be looking for both of you." "Let them look," Daniel said, though his hands shook slightly as he set down the backpack containing printed copies of the most damning files. "We have everything we need to bury him." Angela turned to Clara, studying her with the practiced assessment of someone who'd interviewed hundreds of sources. "Are you ready to go on record? Once we publish this, there's no taking it back. Your father will use every resource he has to destroy your credibility." Clara's jaw tightened. "He's been trying to destroy my credibility for months, telling people I'm mentally unstable, that I'm delusional, that I need to be hospitalized for my own safety." Her voice was steady, but Daniel could see the pain underneath. "I spent 6 years watching him build an empire on other people's suffering. I'm done being silent." "Good." Angela pulled out her recording equipment, setting up 2 cameras at different angles. "We're going to record your full testimony, then I'm bringing in my senior editor and our legal team. We'll need to verify everything you say, cross-reference it with the documents, build a timeline that's airtight." "How long will that take?" Daniel asked. "If we work straight through, 48 hours, maybe less. I've already got experts standing by. Environmental scientists who can confirm the contamination data, medical professionals who can link the health effects to toxic exposure, forensic accountants who can trace the money." Angela's expression was fierce. "We're going to make this story impossible to dismiss." The door opened, and a tall black man in his 60s entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He had the kind of presence that commanded attention without saying a word. "This is James Morrison, my senior editor," Angela said. "James, meet Daniel Carter and Clara Whitmore." James handed the coffees to Daniel and Clara, his eyes kind despite the gravity of the situation. "I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've never seen a cache of evidence like what Angela showed me. If even half of what's in those files is verifiable, we're looking at one of the biggest corporate crime stories of the decade." "It's all verifiable," Clara said quietly. "I made sure of that. Every email has metadata, every financial transaction has documentation, every contamination report has corresponding EPA filings that my father paid people to bury." James nodded slowly. "Then let's get started. Clara, we're going to need you to walk us through everything from the beginning. How you discovered what your father was doing, how you gathered the evidence, what you witnessed personally." For the next 6 hours, Clara talked. She explained how she'd started working for Elite Solutions during her gap year before college, doing administrative work in her father's office. At first, she'd just been filing paperwork and scheduling meetings, trying to understand the business her father had built from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. "I was proud of him," Clara said, her voice breaking slightly. "He'd come from nothing, worked his way up, built this massive company. I wanted to be part of that legacy." But then she'd started noticing patterns in the documents she was filing. Properties purchased well below market value. Environmental reports that disappeared after initial filings. Settlement agreements with families who'd lost loved ones to mysterious illnesses. "I thought it was just bad luck at first," Clara continued. "Coincidences." But there were too many coincidences, all following the same pattern. A neighborhood would have water quality issues, property values would crash. Elite Solutions would buy up the land cheap, and 6 months later they'd develop it into luxury condos or commercial space. She'd started making copies, quietly, carefully, staying late after everyone else left, accessing her father's email account when he left his computer unlocked, pulling reports from archives that were supposed to be confidential. "He caught me once," Clara said, her hands twisting together in her lap. "I was in his office at midnight, downloading files to a USB drive. He came back because he'd forgotten his phone. I told him I was just catching up on filing work, and he believed me. Or pretended to believe me. I'm still not sure which. Daniel watched her face as she spoke, seeing the anguish of a daughter who'd loved her father and discovered he was a monster. His heart ached for her. The questioning continued through lunch, which they ate at the conference table without stopping. Angela and James took turns asking questions, drilling down into details, verifying timelines, making sure every piece of Clara's testimony could be corroborated by the documentary evidence. "Tell us about Riverside Manufacturing," Angela said, pulling up the relevant files on her laptop. "That was one of the bigger operations. 200 employees, been operating for 30 years. Clara nodded. "Riverside was the first major contamination I found proof of. My father's team identified the property as valuable. It was close to downtown near the river, perfect for luxury development. But the factory had been there since the 70s, and the workers had strong union protection. They couldn't just buy it out." "So they poisoned the groundwater," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "They drilled unauthorized wells upstream and dumped industrial waste into the aquifer," Clara confirmed. "Made it look like natural seepage from old infrastructure. Within a year, people in the surrounding neighborhoods started getting sick. The factory's insurance costs skyrocketed. The union lost bargaining power because the company was bleeding money on health claims. Elite Solutions made a generous offer to buy the property and relocate the workers. But they never relocated anyone," Angela said. "No. They just shut it down, laid everyone off, and sat on the land until the contamination story died down. Then they developed it into the Riverside luxury apartments, sold units for $500,000 each." Claire's voice was bitter. "My father made $200 million off that deal." James leaned forward. "Did you ever confront him about any of this?" "Once. About 3 months before I ran." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I asked him directly about the Riverside contamination, showed him some of the documents I'd found. He told me I was being naive, that business required difficult choices, that the families who got sick were compensated fairly." "What did you say?" "I told him people died, that no amount of money could compensate for that. He looked at me like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked." Clara wiped at her eyes. "He said, 'Sweetheart, if we waited for everything to be perfectly safe and perfectly fair, nothing would ever get built. Progress requires sacrifice. The question is whether the sacrifice serves the greater good.'" Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He thought about Sarah, about her last weeks in the hospital, about Lily asking why Mommy couldn't come home. Greater good. The phrase made him sick. "That's when you started planning to expose him," Angela said gently. "That's when I realized he would never stop. That he genuinely believed he was doing the right thing, that the ends justified the means." Clara straightened her shoulders. "So, yes, I started planning. I spent the next 3 months systematically copying every incriminating file I could find. I created multiple backups, hid USB drives in different locations, sent encrypted files to secure email accounts. I knew he would come after me when he found out, and I wanted to make sure the evidence survived even if I didn't." The room fell silent at that. James and Angela exchanged glances. "Did you believe your father would actually harm you?" James asked carefully. "I believed he would do whatever it took to protect his empire," Clara said. "And I was right. When he discovered what I'd done, he didn't try to reason with me or convince me I was wrong. He had me declared mentally incompetent, tried to have me committed to a private psychiatric facility, froze my bank accounts, and sent security teams to hunt me down." "That's when you ran," Daniel said. Clara nodded. "I'd been preparing for it. I had cash hidden, fake IDs, a plan. But I didn't count on how far his reach extended. Every hotel I tried to check into, every apartment I tried to rent, somehow he found me within days. His security teams were always one step behind me. I was running out of options, running out of money, running out of places to hide." "And then you found my ad for a room to rent," Daniel said quietly. "I was desperate. I'd been sleeping in my car for 3 days, too scared to use credit cards or go anywhere with security cameras. Your ad didn't require a credit check or references, just cash and a quiet tenant. It seemed perfect." Clara turned to look at him. "I never meant to put you and Lily in danger. I thought if I kept my head down, stayed invisible, I could wait out the search until my father believed I'd left the country or destroyed the evidence." But you couldn't stay invisible forever, Angela said. No, someone must have recognized me, or maybe they were monitoring rental listings. I don't know how they found me, but once they did, Clara's voice trailed off. They kicked down my door and dragged you out, Daniel finished. Threatened my daughter to make sure I didn't interfere. James was typing rapidly on his laptop, making notes. This is powerful testimony, Clara. Combined with the documents, we have enough to build a comprehensive case. But I need to ask you something difficult. Go ahead. Are you prepared for what comes next? Your father will claim you're lying, that you fabricated these documents, that you're mentally unstable and seeking revenge for some imagined slight. He'll trot out psychiatrists who'll testify you're delusional. He'll dig into every aspect of your life, looking for ammunition to discredit you. James's expression was sympathetic but serious. They'll make this personal and ugly. Are you ready for that? Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, My father killed people for profit. He poisoned communities, destroyed lives, and paid off victims to keep them silent. If exposing him means enduring some character assassination, I can handle it. The people who died deserve justice more than I deserve comfort. Daniel reached over and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back, drawing strength from the contact. Angela stood up, stretching. All right, James, start coordinating with our legal team and expert witnesses. I want verification on every single document by tomorrow morning. Clara, you'll need to stay somewhere safe while we finalize the story. Victor Whitmore will be looking for you. She can stay with me, Daniel said immediately. Daniel, that's the first place they'll look, Angela protested. Then let them look. I'm not hiding anymore. Daniel's voice was firm. Clara is part of my family, and my home is her home. If Victor Whitmore has a problem with that, he can take it up with me directly. Clara's eyes filled with tears again. You've already risked so much. And I'll keep risking it, Daniel interrupted. You stood up for what was right, even when it meant losing everything. The least I can do is stand beside you now. James smiled slightly. You've got guts, Mr. Carter. I'll give you that. But Angela's right. You need protection. I know some people, former law enforcement, who do private security work. Let me make some calls. Over the next hour, while Angela and Clara continued reviewing documents, James arranged for 2 former police officers to provide security at Daniel's apartment. He also contacted the local precinct and filed a formal complaint about the break-in and threats against Daniel's family, creating an official record that would make it harder for Elite Solutions to operate in the shadows. By early evening, Daniel's exhaustion was catching up with him. He'd been awake for nearly 36 hours straight, running on nothing but coffee and determination. Angela noticed him swaying on his feet. Go home, she ordered. Get some sleep, both of you. We've got what we need for now, and you're no good to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. What about the story? Daniel asked. We worked through the night verifying everything. If it all checks out, and I believe it will, we publish tomorrow evening. Prime time, maximum exposure. Angela's eyes gleamed with the thrill of a reporter on the verge of breaking a massive story. By this time tomorrow, Victor Whitmore's world will be burning down around him. The drive home felt surreal. Daniel kept expecting police lights in his rearview mirror or to find Elite Solutions security waiting at his apartment. But the streets were quiet, ordinary people going about their ordinary lives, unaware that tomorrow everything would change. Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting when they arrived, relief flooding her face when she saw them both safe. Lily's been asking for you all day, she said quietly. I told her you'd be home soon. Thank you for staying with her, Daniel said, pressing money into her hand. Money he couldn't really afford to spare, but she'd earned it 10 times over. I can't tell you how much it means. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at Clara, then back at Daniel, understanding more than she said. You're doing the right thing, mijo. Sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing, but it's still right. After she left, Daniel found Lily in her room, curled up with Mr. Hopsworth and nearly asleep. But her eyes flew open when she heard his footsteps. Daddy! She scrambled out of bed and launched herself at him. Daniel caught her, holding her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling his heart settle for the first time all day. I missed you so much, Lily said against his shoulder. Then she saw Clara standing in the doorway and gasped. Clara, you came back! Clara knelt down as Lily ran to her, and wrapped the little girl in a fierce hug. "I came back. I'm so sorry I left without saying goodbye." "It's okay. Daddy said he'd bring you home, and he did. He always keeps his promises." Lily pulled back to look at Clara's face. "Are you going to stay now? For real?" Clara glanced at Daniel, who nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm going to stay." Lily cheered and hugged Clara again, chattering about everything she'd missed, showing her new drawings and rocks she'd collected and a spelling test where she'd gotten a perfect score. Clara listened to all of it with genuine interest, laughing and praising and being present in a way that made Daniel's chest ache with gratitude. After Lily finally went to bed, after extracting promises that Clara would still be there in the morning, Daniel and Clara sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea neither of them really wanted. "You didn't have to do this," Clara said quietly. "Risk everything to get me out. Risk your relationship with Lily, your freedom, everything." "Yes, I did," Daniel said simply. "You gave me evidence that could bring down the people who killed my wife. You trusted me with the truth when you could have just disappeared and left me with nothing. And beyond all that, you became part of our family. Lily loves you. He stopped, not quite sure how to finish that sentence. "I love her too," Clara said softly. "I love both of you. These past 2 months, living here, being part of your lives, it was the first time I felt like I belonged somewhere. Like I wasn't just Victor Whitmore's daughter or an heiress or a tool in someone else's plans. I was just Clara, helping with homework and making pancakes and being part of something real." "You are part of something real," Daniel said. Us. We're family now, and families don't abandon each other." Clara wiped at her eyes. "What happens after the story publishes?" "Even if everything goes perfectly, even if my father goes to prison, he'll have lawyers, appeals, resources we can't match. The legal battle could take years. Then we'll fight for years." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "However long it takes, we do it together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kitchen clock ticking steadily, the sounds of the city filtering through the windows. Eventually, Daniel convinced Clara to take his bed while he slept on the couch. She protested, but he insisted, and she was too exhausted to argue for long. Daniel lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, his mind too wired for sleep despite his body's exhaustion. Tomorrow, Angela would publish the story. Tomorrow, the world would learn what Elite Solutions Corporation had done. Tomorrow, Victor Whitmore's empire would begin to crumble. But what came after tomorrow? Court battles, media scrutiny, potential criminal charges for the break-in at the estate. Clara would be thrust into the spotlight, every aspect of her life examined and judged. Lily would grow up with a father who'd become a whistleblower and possibly a criminal, depending on how the legal system viewed his actions. Was it worth it? Daniel thought about Sarah, about the other families who'd lost people to Elite Solutions' greed, about all the future victims who'd be spared if the company was stopped. He thought about the choice between safety and justice, between protecting himself and protecting others. Yeah, it was worth it. The next morning, Daniel woke to the smell of pancakes. For a moment, disoriented and half asleep, he thought Sarah was in the kitchen cooking breakfast, that the last 3 years had been a nightmare he was finally waking up from. Then reality settled back into place. Clara was making breakfast, Lily was helping her, and Sarah was gone. But the grief that usually accompanied that realization felt different today, softer somehow, mixed with something that might have been hope. He joined them in the kitchen, and Lily immediately started telling him about her plans for the day, asking if Clara could walk her to the bus stop, if they could have movie night that evening, if they could invite Mrs. Rodriguez over for dinner. "We'll see, sweetheart," Daniel said, because he had no idea what today would bring. His phone rang at 9 o'clock. Angela. "It's done," she said without preamble. "The story goes live at 6 p.m. I'm sending you an advance copy now. Every major news outlet will pick it up within an hour. By midnight, Victor Whitmore will be the most hated man in America." Daniel's hands shook as he opened the email on his phone, scanning the headline. Elite Solutions Corporation. How a billion-dollar empire was built on poison and death. The article was comprehensive, devastating, and meticulously sourced. It laid out the entire pattern of contamination, acquisition, and development. It included testimony from Clara, from Daniel, from families who'd signed settlement agreements. It featured analysis from environmental scientists confirming the contamination was deliberate, from medical experts linking the health effects to toxic exposure, from forensic accountants tracing the money. There were photographs, affected communities, victims who died, internal emails from Victor Whitmore himself discussing the environmental impact strategy. It was journalism at its finest, and it was going to destroy a man's legacy. "Angela," Daniel said, his voice rough. "Thank you for believing us, for taking the risk, for doing this right." "Thank you for bringing me the story," Angela replied. "This is what journalism is supposed to be, holding power accountable, giving voice to people who've been silenced. You made that possible." After the call ended, Daniel showed Clara the article. She read it slowly, tears streaming down her face. "My father's going to see this," she whispered. "He's going to know I'm the source. He's going to know I chose this over family loyalty." "You chose justice over complicity," Daniel corrected gently. "There's a difference." The security team James had arranged arrived at noon. Two large, competent-looking men named Marcus and Ray, who positioned themselves at the apartment entrance and made it clear they were there to prevent any unwanted visitors. Daniel appreciated their presence, even though it made the situation feel more real and more dangerous. Lily came home from school full of energy, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. She did homework with Clara, played with her dolls, colored pictures. Normal afternoon activities in a day that was anything but normal. At 5:45 p.m., Daniel, Clara, and even Lily gathered around the laptop. Angela had sent a link to the story's page, which was currently showing content publishing at 6 p.m. They watched the clock tick down. 5:55, 5:58, 5:59. At exactly 6 o'clock, the page refreshed, and the story went live. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Daniel's phone started buzzing with notifications. Twitter exploding with shares and reactions, Facebook posts spreading the link, news aggregators picking up the story. Within 10 minutes, it was trending nationwide. Within 20 minutes, other major news outlets were reporting on it, citing the Metropolitan Investigative Journal as the source. Within 30 minutes, the first statements from Elite Solutions Corporation appeared. Denials, claims of fabrication, threats of legal action. But the evidence was too strong, too well documented, too thoroughly verified. The denials rang hollow against photographs of internal emails signed by Victor Whitmore himself. Daniel's phone rang constantly, reporters requesting interviews, former factory workers thanking him, people who'd lost family members to similar circumstances reaching out. He ignored most of it, too overwhelmed to engage. But one call he answered. It was from a lawyer named Patricia Reeves, who specialized in class action lawsuits against corporations. "Mr. Carter, I represent several families affected by Elite Solutions contamination practices," she said. "I'd like to discuss potential legal action, both criminal and civil. Would you and Miss Whitmore be willing to meet with me?" "Yes," Daniel said, without hesitation. "Absolutely yes." The evening news led with the story. National networks picked it up for their prime-time broadcasts. Anchors discussed it with grave expressions, bringing in experts to analyze the implications, debating what this meant for corporate accountability and environmental regulation. And through it all, Clara sat quietly on the couch, watching her father's empire disintegrate in real time. Around 8 o'clock, Daniel's phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Daniel Carter." The voice was smooth, cultured, and dripping with barely controlled rage. "This is Victor Whitmore. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Daniel's blood went cold. He put the phone on speaker, nodding at Clara so she could hear. "I don't have anything of yours, Mr. Whitmore," Daniel said carefully. "Don't play games with me. My daughter is mentally ill and needs treatment. You helped her escape from a private medical facility, which makes you guilty of kidnapping and a dozen other charges. Return her immediately, and I might be willing to overlook your crimes. Your daughter is 22 years old and capable of making her own decisions. She's not your property, and she's not mentally ill. She's just braver than you gave her credit for." There was a long pause. When Victor spoke again, his voice was ice. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will destroy you, your career, your finances, your custody of your daughter. Everything will be taken from you, And when you're broken and desperate, you'll wish you'd taken the $2 million I offered. You poisoned the water supply in my neighborhood, Daniel said, his voice shaking with rage. My wife died because of what you did. You don't get to threaten me and pretend you have moral authority. Your wife was collateral damage in a necessary business transaction. These things happen. That's why we offer settlements. The casual dismissal of Sarah's life, the reduction of her death to a line item in a business deal, made Daniel want to scream. But he kept his voice level. The world knows what you are now, Mr. Whitmore. The evidence is public. You can threaten me all you want, but it won't change the truth. The truth is whatever I decide it is, Victor snarled. I have resources you can't imagine. I will bury that ridiculous story, discredit everyone involved, and ensure my daughter receives the treatment she needs. This isn't over. You're right about one thing, Daniel said. This isn't over. It's just beginning. He hung up. Clara was pale, shaking. He's not going to stop. He'll come after you, after Lily, after everyone involved in exposing him. Let him try, Daniel said grimly. We have the truth, we have the evidence, and we have people who believe us. That's more power than his money can buy. But even as he said it, Daniel felt fear coiling in his stomach. Victor Whitmore was a billionaire with unlimited resources and no conscience. The fight they'd started wouldn't end with a single news article. It was going to get much worse before it got better. As if on cue, Marcus knocked on the door. Mr. Carter, we have a situation. There's about 20 reporters outside the building and a black SUV that's been circling the block for the last 10 minutes. Might want to keep everyone away from the windows. Daniel pulled the curtains closed and gathered Lily close. Clara sat beside them, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. Outside, the city buzzed with outrage and disbelief as the full scope of Elite Solutions' crimes became clear. Inside Daniel's small apartment, 3 people who'd chosen truth over safety waited to see what the morning would bring. The war Victor Whitmore had promised was coming, and they were ready to fight. The reporters were still camped outside when dawn broke. Daniel watched them from behind the curtains, counting at least 15 news vans with satellite dishes pointed skyward, journalists clutching coffee cups and checking their phones while they waited for someone to emerge from the building. Marcus appeared beside him, moving quietly despite his size. They've been rotating shifts all night. Someone's coordinating them, keeping them here. This isn't just news coverage anymore. Someone wants you trapped in this apartment. Victor Whitmore, Daniel said. That'd be my guess. Keep you isolated, unable to get your daughter to school, unable to work, unable to live normally. Apply pressure until you crack. Marcus crossed his arms. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Daniel thought about Lily, still asleep in her room, unaware that her world had shifted overnight. She'd need to get to school to maintain some semblance of normal life, even as everything around them spiraled into chaos. We go out the back, Daniel decided. Get Lily to school through the alley. Keep her routine as normal as possible. I'll make it happen, Marcus said. Ray's already scoping the route. Clara emerged from Daniel's bedroom, looking exhausted despite having slept. She'd been up half the night monitoring the news coverage, watching as her father's empire began its public collapse. The bags under her eyes told the story of someone who'd made an impossible choice and was living with the consequences. How bad is it out there? She asked, pouring coffee with shaking hands. Bad, Daniel admitted, but manageable. We'll get through this. Clara laughed bitterly. You keep saying that like it's true. My father has unlimited resources and no conscience. He's probably already hired investigators to dig into every aspect of your life, looking for anything he can use against you. Then they won't find anything. I'm just a guy who used to work in a factory and now fixes cars for minimum wage. My life is an open book, and it's a pretty boring one. It won't matter if it's true or not. He'll manufacture evidence, pay people to lie, create scandals out of nothing. Clara set down her coffee cup too hard, liquid sloshing over the rim. That's what he does. That's what he's always done. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. Patricia Reeves, the class action attorney. Mr. Carter, I need you and Clara at my office this morning. We've been contacted by the FBI. Daniel's stomach dropped. The FBI? Environmental Crimes Division. They want to open a formal investigation into Elite Solutions Corporation, and they need witness testimony. This is good news. It means they're taking the allegations seriously. What do they need from us? Everything. Full depositions, access to all the files Clara gathered, timeline reconstruction. And they'll want Clara to testify before a grand jury, probably within the next few weeks. Patricia's voice was brisk and professional. I know this is overwhelming, but this is exactly what we need. Federal charges mean Victor Whitmore can't just lawyer his way out of trouble. Daniel looked at Clara, who'd gone pale. We'll be there. What time? 10 o'clock. And Mr. Carter, bring security. The FBI will protect you once you're in the building, but getting there safely is your responsibility. After hanging up, Daniel relayed the information to Clara. She nodded slowly, processing the implications. A grand jury, she said quietly. That means I'll have to testify against my father under oath, in front of federal prosecutors. You've already testified to Angela. This is just making it official. It's different. Clara's voice was strained. Once I do this, there's no going back. No possibility of reconciliation, no chance he'll ever forgive me. I'll have destroyed my own father. Daniel moved to sit beside her, taking her cold hands in his. Clara, look at me. Your father destroyed himself the moment he decided profit was more important than human lives. You're not destroying him. You're just refusing to help him hide what he's done. There's a difference. Is there? Because it doesn't feel different. It feels like I'm betraying my own family. Your family betrayed you first, Daniel said gently. They held you prisoner, tried to declare you mentally incompetent, threatened people you cared about. That's not love, Clara. That's control. And you don't owe loyalty to people who would hurt you to protect themselves. Lily wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Why is everyone awake so early? Daniel forced brightness into his voice. Just grown-up stuff, sweetheart. How about some breakfast before school? Getting Lily to school turned out to be a tactical operation worthy of a spy movie. Ray led them through the basement and out a service exit into the alley, while Marcus stayed at the front entrance, distracting the reporters with a statement about privacy and legal proceedings. They emerged 3 blocks away, and Ray drove them to Lily's school in an unmarked car. This is like a spy adventure, Lily said from the back seat, clearly delighted by the intrigue. Something like that, Daniel agreed, wishing desperately that his daughter didn't have to experience this kind of stress at age 7. After dropping Lily off, they headed to Patricia Reeves' office in the financial district. The law firm occupied the 20th floor of a gleaming tower, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. Patricia met them in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of sharp intelligence that made Daniel immediately feel like he was in capable hands. 2 FBI agents sat beside her, a middle-aged white man introduced as Special Agent Harrison and a younger Latina woman named Special Agent Gomez. Thank you for coming, Harrison said, his voice neutral and professional. We've reviewed the evidence published in the Metropolitan Investigative Journal, and we have significant concerns about the allegations against Elite Solutions Corporation. Concerns, Clara repeated. People died. My father deliberately poisoned water supplies to manipulate real estate prices. What exactly concerns you about that? Harrison's expression didn't change. The scope and duration of the alleged criminal activity. If your testimony is accurate, we're looking at environmental crimes spanning multiple years and multiple jurisdictions, potentially affecting thousands of people. This would be one of the largest corporate crime cases in recent history. It is accurate, Clara said firmly. I can provide documentation for every claim I've made. Gomez leaned forward. Miss Whitmore, I need to ask you some difficult questions about your relationship with your father and your mental health history. Elite Solutions' legal team is already pushing the narrative that you're unstable, and these allegations are the result of a family dispute rather than actual evidence of wrongdoing. I'm not mentally ill, Clara said, her voice tight. My father tried to have me committed because I discovered his crimes, not because I actually needed psychiatric treatment. Can you prove that? I was evaluated by 3 independent psychiatrists during my time in hiding. All of them concluded I showed no signs of mental illness or instability. Clara pulled documents from her bag, professional assessments, each one stating clearly that she was competent and credible. I kept copies precisely because I knew my father would use this line of attack. Harrison took the documents, scanning them quickly. This helps, but you need to understand what you're up against. Victor Whitmore has already hired Morrison and Associates, one of the most aggressive defense firms in the country. They will tear apart your credibility, your motivations, your entire life story. They'll paint you as an ungrateful daughter seeking revenge for perceived slights. Let them try, Clara said. The evidence speaks for itself. I didn't fabricate thousands of emails and financial records. I didn't create fake EPA reports or forge settlement agreements. The documents are real, and they prove my father is guilty. The documents prove Elite Solutions Corporation engaged in criminal activity, Gomez corrected. Proving Victor Whitmore personally authorized and directed that activity is more complicated. Defense will argue he had plausible deniability, that rogue employees acted without his knowledge, that he's a victim of corporate malfeasance rather than its architect. Daniel had been quiet, but now he spoke up. There are emails from Victor Whitmore himself discussing the environmental impact strategy. His name is on acquisition approvals. He personally signed off on settlement agreements with victims' families. How is that plausible deniability? It's not, Harrison admitted. But defense doesn't need to prove innocence. They just need to create reasonable doubt. And with Whitmore's resources, they can afford to wage a very long, very expensive legal battle. So what do you need from us? Daniel asked. Full cooperation. Clara, we need you to provide complete testimony about the internal workings of Elite Solutions, how decisions were made, who knew what and when. Daniel, we need your testimony about your wife's illness and the timeline of events at Riverside Manufacturing. We'll also need to interview other victims, gather additional evidence, build a case that's absolutely airtight. Patricia spoke up. I should mention that I'm organizing a class action lawsuit on behalf of affected families. Civil suits move independently of criminal proceedings, which means we can pursue financial compensation even as the FBI builds their criminal case. How many families are involved? Clara asked. Currently, I'm representing 43 families across 6 different contaminated sites. But that number grows every day as more people come forward. Patricia's expression was grim. We're estimating hundreds of potential victims, maybe thousands, when you factor in long-term health effects that haven't manifested yet. The enormity of it crashed over Daniel. Hundreds of families who'd lost loved ones or suffered illnesses because Victor Whitmore had valued profit over human life. Sarah was just one name in a list that kept growing. What can we do to help? He asked quietly. Testify. Be visible. Don't let Elite Solutions bury this story or intimidate you into silence. Patricia slid thick folders across the table to both of them. These are subpoenas for grand jury testimony. Clara, you'll testify first, probably next week. Daniel, you'll follow a few days later. Over the next 3 hours, they gave preliminary statements to the FBI agents. Clara walked through the evidence methodically, explaining how she'd discovered the contamination scheme, how she'd gathered documentation, what she'd witnessed personally in her father's office. Daniel described Sarah's illness, the factory closure, the pattern of events that only made sense in retrospect. By the time they finished, it was past 1 o'clock and Daniel's head was pounding. They emerged from the law office to find even more reporters waiting, cameras flashing as they pushed through to Ray's car. Clara, is it true your father tried to have you committed? Mr. Carter, what do you say to allegations you kidnapped Clara Whitmore? Are you romantically involved with Victor Whitmore's daughter? The questions came rapid fire, invasive and inflammatory. Ray physically blocked several reporters who got too close, while Daniel kept his arm around Clara and focused on getting to the car. They made it inside and Ray pulled away, but the damage was done. Daniel's phone was already buzzing with notifications, news articles speculating about their relationship, blog posts questioning Clara's motives, social media posts debating whether Daniel was a hero or an opportunist using tragedy for personal gain. Don't read that garbage, Clara said, watching him scroll through the notifications. It's exactly what my father wants. To discredit us by making this about anything except the actual crimes. I know, but it's hard to ignore when they're calling me a kidnapper and suggesting I'm using you for money or attention or... Daniel stopped himself, realizing how angry he sounded. For what it's worth, I know the truth, Clara said softly. You risked everything to help me, and you asked for nothing in return. That matters more than what strangers on the internet think. They picked up Lily from school and returned to the apartment, where Marcus informed them that Elite Solutions had filed a civil suit against Daniel for kidnapping, trespassing, and theft of corporate property. The USB drive Clara had given him was being characterized as stolen trade secrets. "They're coming at you from every angle," Patricia said when Daniel called her. "Criminal charges, civil suits, media attacks, standard playbook for corporations trying to intimidate whistleblowers. Well, what do I do?" "You keep your head down and trust the process. The FBI investigation is moving forward. The grand jury will hear testimony, and the evidence will speak for itself. In the meantime, I'll handle the civil suit. They have no case. Clara gave you those files voluntarily, and she had every right to expose criminal activity." That evening, Daniel sat with Lily and Clara at the dinner table, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy even as the world went crazy around them. Lily chattered about her day at school, proudly showing off a math test where she'd gotten every problem correct. "Mrs. Henderson said I'm the best in the class at fractions," Lily announced. And at recess, Jenny asked if Clara was my sister now. Clara's eyes widened slightly. "What did you tell her?" "I said you were better than a sister because I got to choose you instead of just being born with you." Lily said it matter-of-factly, then went back to eating her chicken nuggets. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Out of the mouths of children came wisdom that adults spent years trying to articulate. Lily had captured in one sentence what family really meant. Not blood, but choice. Not obligation, but love freely given. Clara was wiping at her eyes, clearly struggling with the same emotion. "Thank you, Lily. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." After Lily went to bed, Daniel and Clara sat on the couch in exhausted silence. The TV played muted news coverage of the Elite Solutions scandal, stock prices plummeting, shareholders demanding answers, board members resigning. Victor Whitmore's carefully constructed empire was crumbling in real time. "My father called me this afternoon," Clara said suddenly, "while we were at the FBI office. Left a voicemail." Daniel turned to look at her. "What did he say?" "That it's not too late to fix this. That if I recant my testimony and claim the documents were fabricated, he'll drop all charges against you and welcome me back into the family." Her voice was hollow. "He actually used the word welcome, like he's doing me a favor by offering to forgive me for exposing his crimes." "Are you tempted?" "No. But part of me wishes I was because that would be easier. Just go back, pretend none of this happened, let him make the consequences disappear." Clara laughed bitterly. "It's pathetic, isn't it? He's a monster, and I still want him to love me." "That's not pathetic. That's human. He's your father. Wanting his love doesn't make you weak. It makes you a person with normal emotional needs." Daniel shifted to face her fully. "But you know you can't go back. Not just because of the legal implications, but because you'd never be able to live with yourself." "I know. I just wish doing the right thing didn't hurt so much." "The right thing usually does hurt," Daniel said quietly. "That's how you know it's right." The next week passed in a blur of legal meetings, media appearances carefully managed by Patricia, and constant security concerns. Daniel did one interview with Angela, explaining on camera why he'd risked everything to expose Elite Solutions. Clara gave a statement to a national news network, calmly and clearly laying out the evidence against her father. The public response was overwhelming. Thousands of people expressed support on social media. Strangers sent messages of encouragement. Former Elite Solutions employees came forward with additional evidence of corporate malfeasance. But there was also vitriol, people who believed Clara was lying, who thought Daniel was manipulating her, who defended Victor Whitmore as a successful businessman being destroyed by political correctness and overzealous regulation. On Thursday morning, Clara testified before the grand jury. She was gone for 6 hours, and when she emerged from the courthouse, she looked drained but resolute. "How did it go?" Daniel asked, meeting her at the entrance. "They indicted him," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Federal charges for environmental crimes, fraud, conspiracy, everything. The prosecutor said it was one of the strongest cases she's ever presented." Daniel pulled her into a hug as cameras flashed around them. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," Clara corrected. "This was never just me." Daniel's grand jury testimony came 2 days later. He described Sarah's illness in painful detail, explaining the symptoms that had baffled doctors, the rapid deterioration, the final weeks in the hospital. He showed them photographs of his wife, healthy and vibrant, then wasting away in a hospital bed. The prosecutor was gentle but thorough. Mr. Carter, in your opinion, what caused your wife's illness? Contamination from Elite Solutions Corporation's deliberate poisoning of the Riverside neighborhood groundwater, Daniel said clearly. I can't prove it absolutely without exhuming her body and running toxicology tests, but the timing matches perfectly. The symptoms matched the documented effects of the chemicals used, and she had no other risk factors. And why didn't you pursue this investigation earlier? Because I didn't know it was deliberate. I thought it was just bad luck, or maybe negligence from the factory's old infrastructure. It wasn't until Clara showed me the evidence that I realized Elite Solutions had done this intentionally. Daniel's voice hardened. They killed my wife to make money on a real estate deal, and they tried to pay me off to keep quiet about it. The grand jury indicted Victor Whitmore on all charges. The news broke during prime time, and within hours the internet exploded with reactions. Elite Solutions stock became virtually worthless. Major clients terminated contracts. Board members fled like rats from a sinking ship. And through it all, Victor Whitmore maintained his innocence, giving interviews where he portrayed himself as a victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by his mentally unstable daughter and the opportunistic man who'd manipulated her. He actually believes it, Clara said, watching one of these interviews. Look at his face. He genuinely thinks he's the victim here. He's convinced himself that his crimes were just smart business, and anyone who says otherwise is attacking success. Do you think he'll ever accept responsibility? Daniel asked. No. Men like my father never do. They reframe reality until they're always the hero of their own story, no matter how much evidence proves otherwise. Clara turned off the TV. But it doesn't matter what he believes. What matters is that he's being held accountable. The trial date was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, Patricia's civil suit was gaining momentum. More families joined the class action every week, their stories heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. A mother who'd lost her teenage son to leukemia. A father whose infant daughter had been born with severe birth defects. An elderly couple who'd both developed respiratory diseases that destroyed their retirement years. Each story was unique, but they all shared the same terrible truth. Elite Solutions Corporation had valued profit over human life, and Victor Whitmore had personally approved every step of the scheme. Daniel threw himself into supporting the legal effort, working with Patricia's team to identify other potential victims, gathering evidence, coordinating with environmental groups who'd been tracking Elite Solutions for years. The work was exhausting and emotionally draining, but it gave him purpose beyond just surviving. Clara struggled more visibly. The weight of testifying against her father, of being the linchpin in his prosecution, wore on her constantly. Some days she was strong and determined. Other days Daniel found her crying in her room, grieving for the father she'd thought she had, mourning a relationship that had never really existed. I keep thinking about when I was little, she told him one night. He used to take me to the park, push me on the swings, buy me ice cream. He seemed like a good dad. How do I reconcile that person with the man who poisoned communities for profit? Maybe he was both, Daniel suggested gently. Maybe he was a good father to you while simultaneously being a terrible person to everyone else. People are complicated. They can love their own children fiercely while showing no empathy for strangers. That's what makes it so hard. Part of me still loves him, even knowing what he's done. Does that make me a bad person? No. It makes you someone capable of complex emotions. You can love who your father was to you while condemning what he did to others. Those feelings can coexist. Lily, mercifully, seemed largely unaffected by the chaos. She went to school, played with friends, did homework with Clara's help. The security team had become such a fixture that she treated Marcus and Ray like friendly uncles, occasionally bringing them drawings or sharing snacks. One evening, Marcus knocked on the door while Daniel was helping Lily with her reading homework. "We've got a situation," he said quietly. Black SUV parked across the street. 2 men inside who've been watching the building for the last hour. They're not reporters. Daniel's stomach clenched. Elite Solutions? Can't confirm, but it fits their pattern. Ray's getting a plate number, but I wanted you aware. Should we be worried? Vigilant, not worried. They're probably just trying to intimidate you, make you feel watched. But keep Lily away from windows, and don't go anywhere alone. That night, Daniel barely slept, hyper-aware of every sound, every car passing outside. Around 3 in the morning, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps in the hallway outside their apartment, too quiet to be a neighbor. He grabbed his phone and texted Marcus, "Someone outside my door." The response came instantly. "On it." Daniel heard Marcus's heavy footsteps, then voices raised in confrontation. He crept to the door and peered through the peephole to see Marcus physically blocking two men in suits from approaching the apartment. "This is private property," one of the men said. "We have a right to be here." "You have a right to be in the building if you live here or are visiting a resident," Marcus replied calmly. "You're doing neither. So you can leave voluntarily, or I can call the police and you can explain to them why you're lurking outside a private residence at 3 in the morning." The men exchanged glances, then retreated down the hallway. Marcus waited until they were gone before knocking softly on Daniel's door. "They're gone for now," he said when Daniel opened up. "But this is escalating. Victor Whitmore is getting desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. You might want to consider relocating temporarily, somewhere they can't find you easily." "I'm not running," Daniel said. "We've come too far to hide now." "Then at least let me increase security. Ray and I can't cover 24 hours alone. We need more people, better equipment, maybe even police cooperation." "Do what you think is necessary. Just keep my daughter safe." That's the plan. The harassment continued over the following days. Anonymous threatening calls. Someone slashed Danielle's car tires. A brick thrown through Mrs. Rodriguez's window with a note telling her to stop helping criminals. The attacks were calculated to create fear without leaving evidence that could be traced back to Elite Solutions. But they had the opposite effect. Instead of intimidating Daniel into backing down, the attacks made him more determined. Every threat reminded him that they were winning, that Victor Whitmore was scared enough to resort to desperate measures. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon when Lily was playing in the small park 2 blocks from their apartment, closely supervised by Ray. Daniel was watching from a bench, Clara beside him, when a well-dressed woman approached them. "Daniel Carter?" she asked, her smile sharp and predatory. "Who's asking?" "My name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm an attorney representing Elite Solutions Corporation." She handed him a business card. "I have a message from Mr. Whitmore. I'm not interested in anything Victor Whitmore has to say." "Not even if it means protecting your daughter." Jennifer's gaze drifted to where Lily was climbing on playground equipment. "Mr. Whitmore is prepared to offer you $5 million and guaranteed immunity from all civil and criminal charges. In exchange, you convince Clara to recant her testimony and turn over all remaining evidence." "Get away from us," Clara said coldly. "Miss Whitmore, your father loves you. He wants you to come home. All of this can be forgiven if you just admit you made a mistake, that you were confused or coerced." "I wasn't confused or coerced," Clara interrupted. "I was telling the truth. My father is a criminal, and he's going to prison." Jennifer's smile vanished. "Then you're both making a terrible mistake. Mr. Whitmore has been very patient, but his patience has limits. Accidents happen. People get hurt. It would be tragic if anything happened to that sweet little girl over there." Daniel was on his feet before he knew he was moving, his hands clenched into fists. "Did you just threaten my daughter?" "I stated a fact. The world is dangerous. Children are vulnerable. You should consider that before you continue this vendetta against a man who's only trying to protect his business interests." Ray was already moving toward them, having noticed the confrontation. He positioned himself between Jennifer and Daniel, his presence intimidating despite his calm demeanor. "Ma'am, you need to leave, now." Jennifer adjusted her purse, her composure perfect. "I've delivered my message. What you do with it is your choice. But remember, Mr. Whitmore always wins. Always. People who stand against him tend to discover that very painfully." She walked away, leaving Daniel shaking with rage and fear. He immediately called Lily over, checking her frantically for any sign of harm, pulling her close. "Daddy, you're squishing me," Lily protested. "Sorry, sweetheart. I just needed a hug." That evening, after Lily was asleep, Daniel and Clara sat with Patricia on a video call, recounting the encounter with Jennifer Walsh. "That's witness intimidation and potentially a criminal threat," Patricia said, her face grim on the laptop screen. "I'm forwarding this information to the FBI and the prosecutor's office. They can add it to the growing list of charges against Victor Whitmore and his organization." "What if they actually try something?" Daniel asked. "What if this wasn't just intimidation? Then we make sure you're protected." I'm petitioning for federal protection, and I'm filing for an emergency restraining order against Victor Whitmore and all Elite Solutions personnel. They won't be able to come within 500 feet of you, Clara, or Lily, without facing immediate arrest. But legal protection felt abstract in the face of Jennifer Walsh's cold threat. That night, Daniel lay awake again, listening to every sound, imagining threats in every shadow. Around 2 in the morning, Clara knocked softly on his door. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "No, keep thinking about what that lawyer said." Clara sat on the edge of the couch, her arms wrapped around herself. "My father won't actually hurt Lily. He's ruthless, but he's not violent. His weapon is money and legal pressure, not physical harm." "You sure about that?" "Because the man you're describing sounds capable of anything. I know him better than anyone. He'll threaten and intimidate and use every legal trick in the book, but he won't cross that line. It would make him the villain, and he needs to believe he's the hero." Clara met Daniel's eyes. "But just to be safe, maybe Lily should stay with your parents for a while, or a friend out of state?" "I don't have family who can take her, and I'm not sending her away like she's the one who did something wrong. We stay together. We face this together. Even if it puts her at risk? The restraining order will protect her, and Marcus and Ray are good at what they do. We'll be okay." Clara didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "I hope you're right." The restraining order came through 3 days later. Victor Whitmore was forbidden from contacting Daniel, Clara, or Lily directly or through intermediaries. He was barred from coming within 500 feet of their residence, Lily's school, or anywhere they were known to frequent. The order didn't stop the harassment entirely, but it forced it to become more subtle. No more threatening visits from lawyers, no more men lurking outside their door. Instead, the attacks moved to the media, carefully orchestrated campaigns to discredit Clara and Daniel, to paint them as opportunists and liars, to suggest that the evidence was fabricated or misinterpreted. But public opinion had largely turned against Elite Solutions. Too many people had been affected. Too many families had lost loved ones. Too much evidence had been verified by independent experts. Victor Whitmore's attempts at damage control felt hollow against the weight of documented crimes. As the trial date approached, Daniel found himself cautiously hopeful for the first time since this nightmare began. They'd survived the worst of the intimidation. The evidence was solid. The prosecution was confident. Justice finally seemed possible. And on quiet evenings, when Lily was doing homework with Clara at the kitchen table, when their small apartment felt warm and safe, despite everything happening outside its walls, Daniel allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to win. The fight wasn't over yet, but they were still standing, still together, still refusing to back down. And that counted for something. The trial began on a gray Monday morning in October, 6 months after Clara had first pressed that USB drive into Daniel's palm and whispered, "Be careful." The federal courthouse was surrounded by protesters, some supporting the victims, others defending Victor Whitmore as a successful businessman being persecuted by an overreaching government. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed toward a sky that threatened rain. Daniel stood on the courthouse steps with Clara, both of them flanked by Marcus and Ray. Patricia Reeves stood beside them, looking every inch the formidable attorney in her tailored suit. "Ready?" she asked. Clara took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." Inside, the courtroom was packed with journalists, victims' families, and curious onlookers who'd managed to secure seats. Daniel spotted Angela Chen in the press gallery, her recorder already running. He found seats in the section reserved for witnesses, Clara beside him, their hands intertwined. Victor Whitmore entered through a side door surrounded by his legal team. He was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Daniel earned in 6 months, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expression one of wounded dignity. He looked every inch the successful businessman being unfairly persecuted, not a man facing multiple counts of environmental crimes and conspiracy to commit fraud. His eyes found Clara across the courtroom. For a moment, something passed between father and daughter: pain, regret, accusation, defiance. Then Victor looked away, his jaw set with determination. The judge entered, a stern-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Thornton, who had a reputation for running a tight courtroom and having zero tolerance for theatrics. She gavelled the proceedings to order, and the prosecution began their opening statement. The lead prosecutor was a sharp woman named Rebecca Martinez, who'd built her career on taking down corporate criminals. She approached the jury with confidence and clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a simple question. Does wealth exempt anyone from consequences? Does success justify any means necessary to achieve it? The evidence will show that Victor Whitmore and Elite Solutions Corporation systematically contaminated water supplies in multiple communities across this country, deliberately poisoned innocent people, and profited enormously from the suffering they caused. Rebecca's voice was measured but powerful. They did this knowingly. They did this intentionally, and they did it because they believed they were too rich and too powerful to be held accountable. She walked the jury through the evidence methodically: internal emails, financial records, contamination reports, medical documentation. She explained how Elite Solutions would identify valuable properties, contaminate the surrounding areas to drive down real estate prices, purchase the land cheaply, then develop it into luxury housing or commercial space worth millions. The defense will try to convince you that Victor Whitmore was an uninvolved CEO, that he didn't know what his subordinates were doing, that he's a victim of rogue employees acting without authorization. But the evidence tells a different story. Victor Whitmore didn't just know about this scheme, he designed it. He approved every step. He personally signed off on contamination plans and settlement agreements with victims' families. This wasn't corporate malfeasance. This was corporate policy, set and enforced from the very top. Rebecca gestured toward the victims' families seated in the gallery. These people lost husbands, wives, children, parents. They lost them to illnesses that should never have existed, to contamination that was entirely preventable, to a corporation that valued profit over human life. And when they asked questions, when they demanded answers, Elite Solutions paid them off and made them sign non-disclosure agreements to keep them quiet. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. But one person refused to stay quiet. Clara Whitmore, the defendant's own daughter, risked everything to expose these crimes. She didn't do it for money or fame. She did it because she couldn't live with the knowledge that her father was killing people and getting away with it. Her courage is why we're here today. Her testimony, combined with thousands of pages of documentary evidence, will prove beyond any doubt that Victor Whitmore is guilty of every charge brought against him. The defense's opening statement was delivered by Jonathan Morrison, a legendary attorney with silver hair and a voice like smooth bourbon. He stood before the jury with practiced ease, his expression sympathetic and reasonable. My client is a self-made man who built a billion-dollar company from nothing through hard work, innovation, and sound business practices. Elite Solutions Corporation has created thousands of jobs, developed struggling neighborhoods into thriving communities, and contributed millions to charity. Is this the profile of a criminal mastermind who deliberately poisons people for profit? Of course not. Morrison walked the jury through Victor Whitmore's biography. The poor kid who worked 3 jobs to put himself through college, who started with a single property renovation and built an empire through sheer determination. He painted a picture of a visionary businessman who transformed blighted urban areas into valuable real estate. The prosecution would have you believe that Mr. Whitmore orchestrated an elaborate scheme to contaminate water supplies. But consider the logic of that accusation. Victor Whitmore is a brilliant businessman. If he wanted to acquire property cheaply, he had dozens of legal methods available to him. Why would he risk everything, his reputation, his freedom, his legacy, on an illegal contamination scheme that could be traced back to him? Morrison's voice took on a tone of regret. The truth is more painful and more personal. Clara Whitmore is Victor's only daughter, and he loves her deeply. But their relationship has been troubled for years. Clara struggled with the pressure of being an heiress, with the expectations that came with the Whitmore name. She began to resent her father's success, to see herself as living in his shadow. When she started working for Elite Solutions, she hoped to prove herself capable of matching his achievements. But the work was harder than she expected. The corporate world was more complex, more morally ambiguous than her idealistic worldview could accept. Daniel felt Clara's hand tighten in his, her whole body rigid with anger. Morrison continued, his tone compassionate and understanding. Rather than admitting she couldn't handle the pressure, Clara created a fantasy where her father was a villain and she was a hero exposing his crimes. She took legitimate business documents out of context, fabricated connections that didn't exist, and convinced herself and others that Elite Solutions was engaged in criminal activity. This isn't malice. This is a young woman having a mental health crisis and being enabled by people who should have gotten her help instead of encouraging her delusions. He turned to look directly at Daniel. Daniel Carter is a tragic figure in this story. He lost his wife to a terrible illness, and in his grief, he desperately wanted someone to blame. When Clara presented him with documents that seemed to explain his wife's death, he latched onto that narrative because it gave his suffering meaning. But grief and desperation don't change facts. The evidence will show that Sarah Carter's illness had no connection to Elite Solutions Corporation, that the contamination Clara alleges never happened, and that this entire case is built on misinterpretation, coincidence, and wishful thinking. Daniel wanted to stand up and shout the truth, to tell the jury that Morrison was a liar defending a murderer. But Patricia had prepared them for this. The defense would attack their credibility, their motives, their mental state. They just had to trust that the evidence would speak louder than Morrison's smooth rhetoric. The first week of trial was dedicated to establishing the technical evidence. Environmental scientists testified about contamination levels in the affected neighborhoods, explaining how the specific chemical signatures matched industrial waste that Elite Solutions had access to. Medical experts connected the health effects documented in victims to the toxins found in the water supply. Forensic accountants traced money from Elite Solutions to shell companies that had conducted unauthorized drilling near the contaminated sites. The defense cross-examined each expert ruthlessly, looking for any uncertainty or ambiguity they could exploit. But the prosecution had chosen their witnesses carefully. Every expert was credentialed, experienced, and unshakable in their conclusions. On Thursday of the first week, Rebecca called Daniel to the stand. He'd been dreading this moment, but as he walked to the witness box and placed his hand on the Bible to swear his oath, he felt surprisingly calm. This was his chance to speak for Sarah, to make sure her death wasn't forgotten or dismissed as just another statistic. Rebecca began gently, "Mr. Carter, can you tell the jury about your wife, Sarah?" "She was a teacher," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "Third grade. She loved working with kids, said they saw the world with fresh eyes, and reminded her why life was worth living. She was funny and kind and the best person I've ever known." "How long were you married?" 9 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years before I worked up the courage to propose. She said yes immediately, told me she'd been waiting for me to ask for months. The memory made him smile despite the pain. "We had Lily 3 years into the marriage. Sarah used to say Lily was the best thing we ever created together." "Tell us about when Sarah got sick." Daniel took a deep breath and described the onset of symptoms. The persistent cough that wouldn't go away, the rashes that appeared without cause, the nausea and fatigue that intensified over weeks. He explained how doctors had run every test imaginable, how they'd been baffled by the combination of symptoms, how Sarah had deteriorated despite aggressive treatment. The final diagnosis was complications from unknown environmental exposure, Daniel said. The doctors couldn't identify the specific toxin, but they were certain something had poisoned her system. "Where were you living when Sarah got sick?" "The Riverside neighborhood, about 2 blocks from Riverside Manufacturing where I worked. We'd lived there for 8 years since right after we got married. It was affordable, close to my job, in a quiet neighborhood. We thought it was safe." Rebecca pulled up a map on the screen showing the Riverside area, marking the factory location and the surrounding residential streets. "And this is where Elite Solutions Corporation conducted unauthorized drilling and waste disposal?" "Yes. According to the documents Clara found, they contaminated the groundwater starting about a year before Sarah got sick. The chemicals seeped into the aquifer that supplied drinking water to the whole neighborhood." Morrison stood for cross-examination, his expression sympathetic. "Mr. Carter, I'm very sorry for your loss. Losing a spouse is devastating, especially when the cause seems inexplicable. But I have to ask, did any doctor ever specifically link your wife's illness to water contamination from Elite Solutions?" "They said it was environmental exposure. But did they specifically identify Elite Solutions as the source?" "No, because we didn't know at the time that the contamination was deliberate. We thought it was just bad luck or old infrastructure problems." Morrison nodded as if this proved his point. "So in other words, you have no direct medical evidence that Elite Solutions caused your wife's death. You have a theory, based on documents provided by Clara Whitmore, that you've chosen to believe because it provides an explanation for a tragedy that might otherwise be meaningless." Daniel's hands clenched on the witness stand railing. I have documents signed by Victor Whitmore authorizing contamination of the riverside groundwater. I have medical records showing my wife suffered from the exact symptoms that contamination would cause. I have a timeline that matches perfectly. That's not a theory, that's evidence. Or it's confirmation bias. You saw a pattern you wanted to see because it gave your grief a target. Morrison's voice was gentle, almost kind, which made his words even more infuriating. Isn't it possible that your wife's illness was simply a tragic coincidence, and you're projecting blame onto my client because you need someone to hold responsible? No. Elite Solutions killed my wife and dozens of other people to make money on real estate deals. That's not projection, that's murder. Morrison shook his head sadly. I understand your pain, Mr. Carter. I truly do, but pain doesn't equal proof. No further questions. Daniel left the stand feeling like he'd been in a fight, emotionally battered but still standing. Clara squeezed his hand when he returned to his seat. You did great, she whispered. You told the truth. That's what matters. The prosecution spent the next week calling victims' families to testify. One by one, they told heartbreaking stories of loved ones lost to mysterious illnesses, of medical bills that destroyed their savings, of Elite Solutions representatives offering settlements in exchange for silence. Each testimony built a pattern that was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Too many people in too many locations suffering the same fate after Elite Solutions operations began in their neighborhoods. Then, on Monday of the third week, Rebecca called Clara to the stand. The courtroom went silent as Clara walked to the witness box. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, no jewelry. She looked young and vulnerable but also determined. After the oath, Rebecca began with basic questions establishing Clara's identity and relationship to Victor Whitmore. Then she moved into more difficult territory. Miss Whitmore, when did you first become aware of your father's contamination scheme? About 18 months ago. I was working in his office, filing administrative documents, and I noticed settlement agreements with families who'd lost loved ones to illnesses near properties Elite Solutions had recently acquired. At first I thought it was just unfortunate coincidence, but there were too many settlements following the same pattern. What did you do? I started investigating, staying late, accessing files I wasn't supposed to see, cross-referencing acquisition dates with contamination reports. The more I dug, the clearer the pattern became. Elite Solutions would identify valuable property, contaminate the surrounding area to drive down prices, wait for people to get sick and property values to crash, then buy everything up cheap. Rebecca walked her through the evidence-gathering process, how Clara had systematically copied thousands of files, how she'd created backups and hidden them in multiple locations, how she'd documented everything with meticulous care. Why did you do this? Why expose your own father? Claire's voice was steady but laced with pain. Because people were dying. Because what he was doing was wrong, and I couldn't be complicit in it. I loved my father. I still love him in some complicated way, but I couldn't watch him destroy lives and do nothing. How did your father react when he discovered what you were doing? He tried to have me committed to a psychiatric facility, said I was delusional, mentally unstable, a danger to myself. He froze my bank accounts, hired investigators to track me down, sent security teams to bring me back for treatment. Claire's eyes found her father across the courtroom. He chose protecting his empire over protecting his daughter. Morrison's cross-examination was brutal. He spent hours trying to poke holes in Clara's timeline, suggesting she'd misinterpreted documents, questioning her technical understanding of environmental science, implying that her resentment toward her father had clouded her judgment. Isn't it true that you argued with your father frequently about his business practices? Morrison asked. Yes, because his business practices included killing people. Or because you disagreed with the hard choices necessary in competitive industries. Your father built a successful company through difficult decisions. You, with no real business experience, judged those decisions from a position of moral superiority without understanding the complexities involved. I understood enough to know that deliberately poisoning communities is wrong. But you didn't understand the technical aspects of environmental management, did you? You're not a scientist or an engineer. You interpreted documents through the lens of your pre-existing bias against your father. The documents speak for themselves. My father's emails explicitly discuss environmental impact strategies for property acquisition. He knew exactly what was happening because he ordered it. Morrison tried multiple approaches, suggesting Clara was motivated by inheritance disputes, implying she'd fabricated evidence, questioning her mental stability. But Clara remained calm and consistent, refusing to be rattled or trapped into contradictions. When she finally stepped down after 2 days of testimony, she looked exhausted but unbowed. Daniel met her at the gate separating the gallery from the court floor. "You were incredible," he said quietly. "I just told the truth. That's all I could do." The defense called their own experts, scientists who questioned the contamination analysis, medical professionals who suggested the victim's illnesses could have multiple causes, business consultants who testified that Elite Solutions followed industry-standard practices. But their testimony felt hollow against the weight of documentary evidence and emotional testimony from victims' families. Victor Whitmore himself took the stand in his own defense, projecting confidence and wounded dignity. He portrayed himself as a hard-working businessman who'd built his company ethically, who'd been betrayed by a troubled daughter who was the victim of a conspiracy by competitors and disgruntled former employees. "I love my daughter," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've spent the last year trying to get her the help she needs. This prosecution is being driven by her untreated mental illness, and it breaks my heart to see her so lost." But Rebecca's cross-examination dismantled his performance piece by piece. She showed him his own emails discussing contamination strategies. She confronted him with settlement agreements bearing his signature. She asked him to explain financial transfers to shell companies that had conducted illegal drilling. Victor had explanations for everything. The emails were misinterpreted. The settlements were precautionary measures to avoid litigation. The financial transfers were legitimate business expenses. But the explanations felt increasingly desperate as Rebecca piled evidence upon evidence. "Mr. Whitmore, do you expect this jury to believe that thousands of incriminating documents are all being misinterpreted? That every victim's family, every environmental scientist, every forensic accountant, and your own daughter are all wrong or lying? I expect them to see this for what it is, a witch hunt against a successful businessman by people who resent success. Or perhaps it's accountability finally catching up to someone who thought wealth made him above the law." After 5 weeks of testimony, both sides rested their cases. Closing arguments took an entire day, Rebecca methodically building the case against Victor Whitmore piece by piece, Morrison appealing to reasonable doubt and sympathy for a father betrayed by his daughter. Then the jury retired to deliberate. The wait was agonizing. Daniel, Clara, and Patricia sat in a conference room near the courthouse, drinking endless coffee and watching news coverage of the trial. Lily stayed with Mrs. Rodriguez, mercifully insulated from the stress. Hours passed, then days. The jury sent out questions to the judge, requested clarification on specific charges, asked to review certain pieces of evidence. Each request was analyzed and debated by legal experts on television, everyone trying to predict what it meant. On the third day of deliberation, Daniel's phone rang. "Patricia, they have a verdict. Get to the courthouse immediately." The courtroom was packed when they arrived, every seat filled with journalists, victims' families, curious onlookers who'd been following the trial. Victor Whitmore sat at the defense table looking pale but composed, his legal team clustered around him in a protective huddle. Judge Thornton called the court to order. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The jury foreman, a middle-aged black woman who'd been taking meticulous notes throughout the trial, stood. "We have, Your Honor." Please read the verdict." The foreman unfolded a piece of paper, her hand steady. "In the matter of United States versus Victor Whitmore, on the charge of conspiracy to commit environmental crimes, we find the defendant guilty." A ripple went through the courtroom. Daniel felt Clara's hand grip his tightly. "On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. On multiple counts of illegal disposal of hazardous waste, we find the defendant guilty." Count after count, the same word. Guilty. 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 Victor Whitmore's face remained impassive, but Daniel saw his hands shaking slightly where they rested on the defense table. When the foreman finished reading all 37 guilty verdicts, Judge Thornton addressed the court. "Mr. Whitmore, you have been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing will take place in 4 weeks. Until then, given the severity of the charges and your substantial financial resources, I'm remanding you to federal custody. Bailiff, please take the defendant into custody. Two bailiffs moved forward. Victor Whitmore stood slowly, adjusting his tie with practiced dignity, even as handcuffs were placed on his wrists. His eyes found Clara one last time, and in that moment, Daniel saw something break in the older man's face. The final realization that he'd lost everything. Then Victor was led away through a side door, and the courtroom erupted in noise. Journalists rushed for the exits to file their stories. Victims' families embraced, crying with relief and vindication. Patricia was immediately surrounded by reporters requesting comment. Daniel turned to Clara and found her crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said gently, pulling her into a hug. "It's over. Justice happened." "I know," Clara said against his shoulder. I thought I'd feel relieved, but all I feel is sad. He's my father, and I just helped send him to prison for the rest of his life. He chose this path. You just refused to lie for him. There's a difference." They stayed like that for a long moment while chaos swirled around them. Then Angela approached, her recorder raised. "Clara, Daniel, can I get a statement?" Clara wiped her eyes and faced the camera with dignity. "Justice doesn't bring back the people who died. It doesn't undo the suffering my father caused. But it proves that no one is above accountability, no matter how wealthy or powerful. I hope the families affected by elite solutions can find some peace, knowing the truth has been heard and believed. Do you have any regrets about exposing your father?" "My only regret is that I didn't do it sooner. That more people had to suffer before I found the courage to act." Clara's voice was firm. "But I'd make the same choice again. Some things are more important than family loyalty." Outside the courthouse, the protest crowd had grown to hundreds. When Daniel and Clara emerged with Patricia, they were met with cheers from the victim advocacy groups and hostile shouts from the minority still defending Victor Whitmore. Marcus and Ray formed a protective barrier, guiding them to the waiting car. But before they reached it, a woman broke through the crowd and approached Clara. She was in her 60s, wearing a simple black dress, her face lined with grief. "Miss Whitmore, my name is Helen Rodriguez. My son died 3 years ago from leukemia. He was 19 years old. We lived near one of your father's properties." Clara went very still. "I'm so sorry for your loss." "I wanted to thank you," Helen said, her voice breaking. "For 15 years I've been trying to understand why my boy got sick. The doctors couldn't explain it. Your father's company gave us $50,000 and made us sign papers saying we wouldn't sue. I took the money because I needed to bury my son, but it never felt right. Never felt like enough." She reached out and took Clara's hands. "You gave me answers. You gave all of us answers. And more than that, you showed us that someone in that family had a conscience, that not everyone with the Whitmore name is rotten. Thank you for your courage."
Bemas?
Clara was crying again, but she managed to say, "Your son deserved better. They all deserved better. I'm just sorry it took me so long to do something about it." Helen hugged her tightly, and then she was gone, absorbed back into the crowd. Clara stood there trembling, and Daniel put his arm around her shoulders. "Come on, let's go home." Home. The word carried weight it hadn't held before. Not just a place, but a concept. Family, belonging, safety. They picked up Lily from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, and the little girl launched herself at both of them with unbridled joy. "Did you win?" she asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez said there was a big trial and you were fighting bad guys. Did you win?" "We won," Daniel confirmed, holding his daughter close. "The bad guys are going to prison for a very long time." "Good. Can we have pizza for dinner to celebrate?" The simple request, so wonderfully normal and childish, made Daniel laugh. "Yeah, sweetheart, we can definitely have pizza." That night, after Lily was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Daniel and Clara sat on the couch with glasses of cheap wine, processing everything that had happened. "Patricia called while you were putting Lily to bed," Clara said. "Sentencing is scheduled for 4 weeks from now. The prosecution is asking for 25 years minimum. How do you feel about that?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks he deserves life in prison. Part of me can't stand the thought of my father dying in a cell." Clara stared into her wine glass. "Is it wrong that I still love him even after everything?" No, it's human. Love doesn't just disappear because someone does terrible things. You can love who your father was to you while condemning what he did to others. Those feelings can coexist. Will they ever stop hurting? Probably not, but it'll get easier. And you'll know you did the right thing, even when it was the hardest thing. 4 weeks later, they returned to the courthouse for sentencing. Judge Thornton listened to victim impact statements for 3 hours. Family after family describing the devastation Elite Solutions had caused, the lives destroyed, the trust shattered. Then she turned to Victor Whitmore, who stood to receive his sentence. Mr. Whitmore, you have been convicted of 37 counts involving environmental crimes, fraud, and racketeering. The evidence showed a systematic pattern of criminal activity spanning multiple years and affecting hundreds of victims. You used your wealth and position to poison communities, destroy lives, and silence those who questioned your actions. You showed no remorse, no accountability, no recognition of the harm you caused. Judge Thornton's voice was hard as steel. The court sentences you to 35 years in federal prison on each count, to be served consecutively. Additionally, all assets of Elite Solutions Corporation are to be liquidated and distributed to victims as restitution. You are hereby ordered to pay compensatory and punitive damages totaling $4.2 billion. The number was staggering. It meant Victor Whitmore would spend the rest of his life in prison and die penniless, his empire dismantled, his legacy destroyed. Victor showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He simply nodded once, then was led away by the bailiffs. Clara didn't cry this time. She just sat quietly, staring at the empty defense table where her father had sat moments before. "It's really over," she said softly. "Yeah," Daniel agreed. "It's really over." The following months brought a strange kind of peace. Patricia's class action lawsuit resulted in a settlement of nearly $3 billion to be distributed among the victims' families. Daniel received compensation for Sarah's death, money that could never replace her, but would ensure Lily's future was secure. Elite Solutions Corporation was dissolved, its properties sold, its executives facing their own criminal charges. The contaminated sites were cleaned up under federal supervision. Memorials were erected in affected neighborhoods, honoring those who'd died. Daniel used some of his settlement money to pay off all his debts and put the rest in a trust for Lily's education. He quit his minimum wage job at the auto shop and went back to school, studying environmental science. If corporations were going to poison communities, he wanted the knowledge to detect it and stop it before more people suffered. Clara enrolled in college, studying public health and environmental policy. She wanted to understand the systems that had allowed her father's crimes to continue for so long, to find ways to prevent similar tragedies in the future. She worked part-time at a nonprofit that helped contamination victims navigate the legal system and access medical care. She also stayed in the apartment, though not as a tenant anymore. Somewhere along the way, the lines had blurred between roommate and family. She was just Clara now, the person who helped Lily with homework and made pancakes on Saturday mornings and belonged in their lives as completely as if she'd always been there. One evening, about a year after the trial, Daniel found Clara sitting on the couch with a letter in her hands, tears streaming down her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately worried. "It's from my father, from prison." Clara handed him the letter with shaking hands. Daniel read it carefully. Victor's handwriting was still elegant, controlled, giving no indication of the desperate circumstances in which it had been written. The letter was short. It said that he'd had time to think, that he understood now why Clara had done what she'd done, that he was sorry for the pain he'd caused her and countless others. It said he didn't expect forgiveness, but hoped she could find peace. It ended with, "I love you, and I'm proud of the person you've become, even if that person had to destroy me to exist." "What are you going to do?" Daniel asked gently. "I don't know. Part of me wants to write back, to try to rebuild some kind of relationship. Part of me thinks that's betraying everyone he hurt." Clara wiped at her eyes. "What would you do?" Daniel thought about it carefully. "I think you can acknowledge that he's your father and you have complicated feelings about him, while still maintaining the boundaries you need. You don't have to choose between complete forgiveness and complete rejection. You can exist in the messy middle ground where you accept his apology without absolving him of responsibility." "That sounds hard. Most worthwhile things are." Clara eventually wrote back, A short letter acknowledging receipt of his apology, but making clear she wasn't ready for a relationship. She told him she hoped he would use his time in prison to genuinely reflect on the harm he'd caused and find some kind of redemption, but that her forgiveness wasn't something he could earn or expect. It wasn't closure, exactly, but it was a kind of peace. 2 years after the trial, on a sunny Saturday morning in spring, Daniel stood in his kitchen making pancakes while Lily and Clara set the table. It was a scene that had repeated hundreds of times, comfortable and familiar and perfect in its ordinariness. Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on the door, bringing fresh bread from the bakery down the street. Marcus and Ray stopped by with coffee, no longer bodyguards, but friends who'd become part of their extended family. Angela called to say she'd won a Pulitzer for her Elite Solutions coverage and was taking them all to dinner to celebrate. After breakfast, Lily dragged Clara to her room to show her a school project about heroes. Daniel cleaned the kitchen, listening to their laughter echoing down the hallway, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. Sarah's absence would always be a wound that never fully healed, but a sense that life had meaning again, that their family had survived and even thrived despite everything that had tried to break them. Later that day, Daniel took Lily to the park. She ran ahead to the playground while he sat on a bench, watching her climb and swing and play with the fearless abandon of childhood. Clara joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. She wrote about you in her hero project, Clara said. Said you were the bravest person she knows because you stood up for what was right even when it was scary. She wrote about you too, Daniel replied. Said you taught her that family isn't just about blood, it's about choosing to love people and standing by them no matter what. Smart kid. She gets it from her mom. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Lily play. Around them, the city went about its business. People walking dogs, joggers passing by, couples pushing strollers. Ordinary life, beautiful in its normalcy. Do you ever regret it? Clara asked quietly. Everything you gave up, the risks you took, the danger you put yourself and Lily through? Daniel thought about Sarah, about the justice she'd finally received. He thought about the hundreds of families who now had answers and compensation. He thought about the communities that would never again be poisoned by Elite Solutions Corporation. And he thought about the young woman sitting beside him, who'd been a desperate stranger renting a room and had become something infinitely more precious. Not for a second, he said. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight costs everything. Justice, truth, family. Family, Claire repeated softly, testing the word. I like that. Me too. Lily ran over, breathless and excited. Daddy, Clara, come push me on the swings. I want to go really high. They followed her to the swing set, taking turns pushing her higher and higher as she laughed with pure joy. The sun was warm on Daniel's face. The air smelled like fresh grass and possibility, and for the first time since Sarah's death, the future didn't feel like something to survive but something to embrace. That evening, after Lily was in bed, Daniel and Clara sat on the apartment balcony watching the city lights. It wasn't much of a balcony, barely enough room for 2 chairs and a small table, but it was theirs. Thank you, Clara said suddenly. For what? For taking a chance on a desperate stranger who answered your rental ad. For believing me when I said I was in trouble. For risking everything to get me out of my father's house. For standing beside me through the trial and the aftermath and all the messy, complicated stuff that came after. Her voice was thick with emotion. For giving me a family when I'd lost everything else. You gave us a family too, Daniel said. This apartment was just walls and obligations before you moved in. You made it feel like a home again. Made us feel like a family again. So what happens now? What's next for us? Daniel considered the question. The settlement money meant they could move to a better neighborhood, a bigger apartment, maybe even buy a house. But this place had become sacred ground. The location where they'd fought for justice and won, where they'd built a family out of choice rather than blood, where they'd learned that courage and truth mattered more than comfort or safety. I think we stay right here, he said. Keep building the life we've started. Keep fighting for the things that matter. Keep being family. I'd like that, Clara said softly. They sat together as darkness fell completely and the city transformed into a sea of lights. Somewhere in the building, music played. Cars passed on the street below. The world kept turning, indifferent to individual stories of pain and triumph. But in this small apartment, in this chosen family, something precious had been built from the ruins of tragedy. Justice had been served. Truth had prevailed. And three people who'd been broken by loss had found their way back to wholeness by refusing to stay silent when silence would have been easier. Years later, when Lily was grown and writing her college application essay, she would describe this time in her life, not as a period of crisis and danger, but as the moment she learned what heroism really meant. Not superpowers or grand gestures, but ordinary people making the hard choice to do what's right even when it costs everything. She would write about her father, who'd risked his freedom and safety to expose corporate crimes, about Clara, who'd sacrificed her family legacy to save strangers she'd never met, about the community of victims who'd found their voices and demanded accountability. And she would write about the lesson that had shaped her entire understanding of justice, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent. That truth matters more than comfort. That family isn't about blood or obligation, but about choosing to love people and stand by them when the world tries to tear them apart. In the end, Victor Whitmore's legacy wasn't the billion-dollar empire he'd built, or the luxury developments bearing his name. It was the daughter who'd had the courage to destroy that empire rather than be complicit in its crimes. It was the families who'd finally received justice for their losses. It was the communities that would never again be poisoned for profit because one person had refused to look away from evil just because it wore an expensive suit. And in a small apartment in the city, three people who'd been strangers brought together by desperation had become the truest kind of family. The kind that chooses each other every single day, not because it's easy, but because love and loyalty and truth are worth fighting for. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive quietly, wrapped in legal briefs and courtroom decorum. Sometimes it begins with a single brave decision, a door open to a stranger who needed help, and two people who refused to stay silent when the powerful demanded their complicity. Sometimes it begins with courage and ends with family, and that in the end is worth everything.